Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak. Matthew Patrick Matt Podolak, born June 10, 1975, in Ohio, USA, to Patricia Romano and Leonard Podolak. In high school, Matthew was a member of the hockey team. After graduating, he enlisted in the U.S. Navy and later worked at Phoenix Industrial Finishing, a company owned by his uncle. Although this provided opportunities for advancement, but Matthew encountered difficulty to connect with his co-workers, who may have felt jealous of his privileged position. His sister, Chrissy Duca, attributed the tension was partly due to rumors of a possible promotion, which his colleagues believed he did not deserve. Outside of work, Matthew was an outdoors enthusiast who enjoyed activities such as boating, camping, and hunting. He also played softball and hockey during his free time. In 2003, Matthew met Holly McFeeture, and they began dating shortly after, eventually they moving in together in Cleveland. The relationship marked a new chapter in Matthew's life. Friends said that he was eager to settle down and start a family. Matthew and Holly had 2 children together, Samantha and Josh, and also raised Holly's child from a previous relationship as part of their family. Matthew's mother, Patricia, said he loved Holly very much, and his feelings for her were sincere. Matthew's life underwent a drastic change when he transformed from a bachelor to a father of 3 in a short period. Initially, his relationship with Holly was filled with love and mutual understanding. However, by 2005, their romance had turned sour, becoming increasingly argumentative and strained. On multiple occasions, Matthew would leave home after a fight with Holly and spend the night with a friend. Friends, who had grown concerned about the relationship, advised Matthew to end things with Holly, citing her selfish behavior as a major red flag. Despite their warnings, Matthew refused to listen and continually returned to Holly. Furthermore, Matthew had taken out a life insurance policy that named Holly as the beneficiary. Despite the advice of friends to remove her from the policy, Matthew did not make any changes. During this time, Matthew's behavior was erratic, which ranged from extreme happiness to intense anger, upset, and fear. According to Matthew's best friend, Russell, he had become depressed during this time. However, he seemed overly optimistic about his future, particularly when it came to raising his 3 children, a prospect that filled him with both hope for the future. Russell advised Matthew to take precautions and remove the guns from their home due to the volatile situation they were in. After the hockey season ended in 2006, he started online gambling, which resulted in him losing a lot of money. His family and friends noticed that he was struggling with depression and advised him to see a doctor. He followed their advice and was prescribed antidepressants. By the spring of 2006, Matthew's health started to deteriorate. His condition worsened by Memorial Day weekend, causing Russell to become extremely concerned about Matthew's physical well-being. Around that time, Russell had asked him for help transferring a motor from one boat to another. However, he was no longer the strong person he once was, experiencing severe back pain and complaining of excessive sweating and a lack of strength. Russell urged Matthew to see a doctor and recommended Dr. Thomas Mandat. He scheduled an appointment with Dr. Mandat for July 26, 2006. On the day of the appointment, he called Russell to ask for directions to the doctor's office. During their conversation, Russell could hear Holly arguing with Matthew in the background. Matthew visited the doctor, complaining of back pain. After examining him, Dr. Mandat diagnosed him with kidney stones and prescribed medication to help pass the stones and alleviate the associated pain. In a phone call to his father on the afternoon of July 30th, Matthew shared his excitement about buying a new fishing rod for his daughter. He was looking forward to taking her fishing, hoping they could go together soon, along with his father. Matthew's anticipation for their upcoming family outing were evident in the conversation with his father. On the evening of the same day, Matthew attended a party with Russell. He found Matthew's health condition alarming. Matthew had gained significant weight, was sweating excessively, and struggled to walk. Matthew also complained of severe back pain. Later that evening, Matthew's condition worsened, and Holly became concerned. She called 911 and then contacted Matthew's father, informing him that something was wrong with his son. Matthew's father had a brief phone conversation with him and found he to be confused and very distressed. Matthew was rushed to the emergency room at Parma General Hospital, where doctors suspected he was experiencing organ failure. Tests revealed that Matthew's kidneys had failed, and he was suffering from metabolic acidosis, a condition where the blood becomes highly acidic. Dr. Mandat, an emergency room doctor, suspected that Matthew had ingested a toxic substance, such as methanol or antifreeze. When questioned, Holly denied the possibility that Matthew had swallowed antifreeze or medical alcohol, asserting that he had not consumed anything that could have caused harm. On July 31, 2006, Matthew passed away at the hospital due to kidney failure. According to Dr. Mandat's testimony, Matthew's death was not caused by respiratory problems, as metabolic acidosis typically is. Instead, Dr. Mandat explained that ethylene glycol can also cause this condition. After Matthew's death, his family and friends were overcome with grief, but Holly seemed unaffected. In the days that followed, her friend Rebecca Vega tried to offer support and accompanied her to the funeral home. However, Vega noticed that Holly did not feel sad at all. At the wake, Matthew's father had to ask Holly to join the family in the main room to receive visitors, and even then, she appeared to be unfeeling and indifferent. Russell recalled that Holly acted like it was a normal gathering, showing no signs of grief. The day after Matthew's death was particularly telling. Holly used Matthew's bank card to withdraw money from an ATM and wrote checks in his name, draining his bank account. When Matthew's mother reported Holly's suspicious behavior to the police, Holly was arrested and charged with 2 counts of forgery. She later agreed to restitution and was placed on probation for 1 year. Holly was the beneficiary of Matthew's life insurance policy, although the policy was relatively small, and she received only $10,000 after his death. 2 weeks later, her friend Rebecca visited Holly and noticed various cleaning supplies, including what appeared to be solvents, left out in the open. Since there were small children living in the house, Rebecca found this absurd and asked Holly about it. She calmly explained that one of the items was antifreeze, which Matthew used to winterize his boat. However, Russell disagreed with this and stated that Matthew's boat had not been operational since its engine broke down in 2004 or 2005. Holly's demeanor after Matthew's death raised concerns with others. For example, she had an intimate relationship with Michael Jaima, a Cleveland police officer, who would often visit her home for coffee. Michael had known Holly since 2002. One day, Michael called Holly to ask if he should come to her house at this time. She replied that there was no need to worry about it anymore, because Matthew died last week, without showing any emotion. She attributed Matthew's death to kidney issues and pain from playing hockey, but her tone came across as careless and heartless. Following Matthew's death, his belongings were removed from the house. Holly asked a friend to erase some content from Matthew's computer and then cut up his clothes to make a quilt. 6 weeks after Matthew's passing, Holly began dating Charles Lipham, a Cleveland police officer. Initially, she told Charles that Matthew had died from kidney failure. However, after the autopsy report was released in January 2007, she changed her story. The autopsy revealed that Matthew had an unusually large amount of ethylene glycol in his system, the key ingredient in antifreeze. Later, Holly told Charles that Matthew might have intentionally taken something to end his life. The autopsy report confirmed that Matthew died from chronic ethylene glycol intoxication, but the coroner was unable to determine how or why he ingested the substance. It's worth noting that Holly told Charles that she didn't know what antifreeze was. Holly also provided conflicting explanations for Matthew's death, telling friend Sean Walsh that Matthew had died in an industrial accident. She also said that one of his co-workers might have poisoned him out of envy due to his connection to the boss. However, Matthew's family suspects that the truth behind his death may have been caused by someone close to him. This skepticism is partly due to Holly's indifferent attitude at the funeral, which contrasted with claims from Holly's sister that she had been crying in the car beforehand. During the investigation, detectives discovered 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of the house Holly had relocated from, which they took into evidence in 2007. The findings were recorded in the police report. Later in 2007, after parting ways with Charles, Holly met Jameson Kennedy while working at a bar. As they started dating, Holly chose not to share any details about Matthew's death with Jameson. However, Jameson has a troubled past, with multiple convictions and struggles with addiction. One evening in September 2008, Holly and Jameson were together, consuming alcohol, and Take Action Intimate. According to Jameson, Holly became emotional, she began crying, and confided in him about Matthew's death. She expressed her desire to leave Cleveland and put the past behind her. Holly confessed to putting something in Matthew's drinks that made him ill and ultimately led to his death. However, Jameson was unsure if she was telling the truth. Seeking advice, Jameson met with his friend Santiago Feliciano, a lawyer, and shared Holly's confession with him. Santiago recommended that Jameson report this information to the authorities if he believed it to be true. Jameson then called Holly to discuss her earlier confession, unaware that their conversation was being recorded. He hoped she will turn herself in and admit that she is the one who caused Matthew's death. Instead, Holly vehemently denied ever harming Matthew, claiming Jameson was misinterpreting her. The conversation between Holly and Jameson caused a rift in their relationship. Jameson began to suspect that Holly was cheating on him. On November 8, 2008, Jameson went to her house to confront her. Feeling threatened, Holly called the police. When the officers arrived, Jameson attacked them and was subsequently arrested and charged with assault. Jameson was sentenced to 10 years in prison after being found guilty of assaulting officers. Following his arrest, he informed the police about a confession he'd have heard from Holly, reportedly linking her to the death of Matthew. This added to the evidence of Holly's involvement in Matthew's death. The police initially investigated the death in 2007 after the autopsy report was released, but the case stalled for many years because they initially did not consider it an intentional act. To re-examine the case, it is essential to look at the autopsy report. Dr. Galita, an experienced forensic pathologist and medical examiner, conducted the autopsy. Then, Dr. Galita and County Coroner Dr. Elizabeth Balch released their autopsy report in January 2007. The report determined Matthew's death was caused by chronic ethylene glycol poisoning, although the circumstances surrounding it were unclear. When Matthew ingested ethylene glycol, it entered his bloodstream and was quickly broken down by his liver using an enzyme called alcohol dehydrogenase. This process converted the ethylene glycol into oxalate, which then combined with calcium to form sharp calcium oxalate crystals. A large number of these crystals accumulated in Pax's kidneys, causing a blockage that disrupted their function. According to Dr. Galita, the severe pain Matthew experienced in his side starting on May 20, 2006, was likely caused by the crystals in his kidneys. When Dr. Galita examined Matthew's kidneys, he found 2 significant things. In addition to kidney damage, there are signs that the kidneys are beginning to heal. Further examination revealed the emergence of the crystals in Matthew's heart and brain, as well as severe acute myocarditis. Myocarditis is an acute inflammation of the heart muscle. The doctor stated that Matthew's myocarditis could not have been caused by an ingestion of ethylene glycol. Instead, the inflammation would have taken at least 3 weeks to develop. He also ruled out a heart attack as the cause of death. In conclusion, Dr. Galita determined that Matthew's death was the result of long-term ethylene glycol poisoning. He believed a series of but acute toxicity episodes, occurring over at least a 3-month period, ultimately led to his death. Matthew often drank iced tea at work, particularly raspberry flavor. He usually brought it in a thermos or the container. A Matthew's friend, Michael Mao, testified that Holly frequently brought Matthew lunch at work. His meal often came with a half or whole gallon container of iced tea. The police found 2 bottles of antifreeze in the garage of Holly's former home in August 2007. The bottles, one a Peak brand and the other a Saturn brand, were discovered after she had moved out. 3 years after Matthew's autopsy results were released, a report amendment was made to the report in 2010. The revised report, signed by County Coroner Dr. Frank Miller, confirmed that Matthew died from poisoning by ethylene glycol, a toxin found in antifreeze, in long term, and deemed the death a homicide. 6 years after Matthew's death, the authorities decided it was time to arrest Holly. She was formally charged in July of that year, with the serious offense of depriving Matthew of his life. Holly's charges came as no surprise to Matthew's family. According to his older brother, Mark, they suspected Holly's involvement in his younger brother's death all along. Mark stated that Holly's behavior around the time of the death raised suspicions, saying she just wasn't acting like somebody who was losing a loved one. Authorities suspected that Holly had been secretly poisoning Matthew by adding antifreeze to his cold raspberry tea for several weeks or even months. In 2013, she went to court, pleading not guilty to the charges. However, there was no direct evidence, only indirect indications of her guilt. To prove their case, the prosecution called 15 witnesses to testify. These witnesses included Matthew's family and friends, Dr. Galita, who conducted the autopsy, Dr. Thomas Mandat, who was Matthew's doctor, and several police officers who investigated the case. Witnesses focused on several key points, including Holly's suspicious actions, a phone call Matthew made before visiting the doctor, and the fact that Matthew had not owned a functioning boat since 2004. Which meant he had no use for antifreeze. Holly's defense team countered by stating that Matthew's family and friends had prejudged her as guilty and then pressured law enforcement to bring charges against her following Matthew's death. The prosecution's strongest testimony came from Dr. Galita, the medical examiner in charge of performing the autopsy. Dr. Galita provided a detailed explanation for his conclusion that Matthew was the victim of chronic poisoning over a period of 3 months. He arrived at this conclusion because on the emergence of crystals in Matthew's kidneys and myocarditis, a type of inflammation of the heart muscle that can be caused by exposure to ethylene glycol. After ruling out causes other of myocarditis, such as infection, Dr. Galita emphasized that Matthew's condition could not have been the result of a single, short-term exposure to ethylene glycol. Dr. Galita also clarified why the initial autopsy report, completed in 2007, did not indicate that Matthew's death was intentional. He explained that, at the time, the coroner's office did not have enough information to make this determination, which led to the manner of death being listed as undetermined. However, after further investigation, the report was revised. The testimony of other witnesses supported Dr. Galita's findings. Matthew's friends reported that his health began to decline in the spring of 2006, which was confirmed by his diagnosis of kidney stones in July 2006. The friends also described a volatile relationship between Matthew and Holly, stating that Matthew seemed fearful and had removed his firearms from the home at the advice of a friend. Holly's lawyers claimed that their client was not involved in Matthew's death, suggesting instead that Matthew's depression led him to end his life. According to the defense, Matthew was struggling with losses from online gambling, work-related issues, and difficulties communicating with his child, ultimately leading him to deliberately ingest a lethal dose of antifreeze. The defense argued that Matthew died from a single dose of antifreeze rather than from prolonged exposure over several weeks or months. In support of this theory, they brought Dr. Robert Lux to testify in court, the coroner from El Paso County, Colorado. Dr. Lux testified that Matthew's death was a result of acute poisoning due to a single ingestion of ethylene glycol, indicating a possible suicidal intent. He disputed Dr. Galita's diagnosis of myocarditis and instead believed Matthew had suffered a heart attack. Furthermore, Dr. Lux explained that myocarditis can occur independently of ethylene glycol poisoning and that flank pain is not typically a symptom of ethylene glycol poisoning. He said that there was no connection between kidney stones and ethylene glycol poisoning, a relevant detail in the case. Several key witnesses testified during the trial. One notable witness was Jameson Kennedy, a felon who had been serving a 10-year sentence for assaulting police officers. Jameson claimed that Holly had confessed to him that she had mixed something into Matthew's drinks. However, Holly denied ever making such a statement. Holly argued that Jameson's testimony was motivated by a desire for leniency in his own case or revenge against her. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury delivered a guilty verdict on all counts. On August 28, 2013, the court sentenced Holly McFeeture to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Dalia DiPolito. On a sunny afternoon in Bon Beach, Florida, a man named Muhammad visited the local police department with a shocking story. He claimed that a woman, whom he knew only as Delilah, had approached him with an unusual and disturbing request. Muhammad alleged that Delilah had offered to hire him to commit a murder. While his story seemed plausible, Muhammad failed to provide one crucial detail: Delilah's last name. Despite this limitation, the Bon Beach Police Department took Muhammad's claim seriously and launched an investigation. The detectives were tasked with identifying the mysterious Delilah and determining who her husband was. To gather more information, they decided to use Muhammad as bait to set up a meeting with Delilah. They chose a local mobile gas station as the meeting location, given Muhammad's statement that Delilah lived nearby. At the designated meeting spot, the police set up several surveillance vehicles to monitor the encounter, hoping to gather evidence and piece together the puzzle surrounding Delilah's identity and motives. Before the woman arrived, the detectives briefed Muhammad on what to say to her. They secretly fitted him with a wire and recorder, allowing them to listen in on their conversation as it happened. As they continued to monitor the mobile gas station, the detectives focused on the interaction between Muhammad and a woman named Delilah. What surprised them was Delilah's appearance, which didn't fit the typical profile of someone who would want her husband killed. Delilah, an attractive woman wearing a skirt and tank top, got into the car with Muhammad. Muhammad, pretending to be hesitant, asked if it was worth having someone killed. Delilah replied that she couldn't divorce her husband because she feared he would retaliate if she tried to leave him and divide their assets. The woman told Muhammad that after her husband's murder, she intended to create an alibi by going to a different location, such as Boca Raton. Muhammad then asked her if anyone would suspect her of involvement in her husband's death, and she confidently replied that no one would accuse her. The detectives were stunned by the woman's casual tone as she discussed hiring a hitman to kill her husband. As they continued to listen, they were horrified by the woman's nonchalant attitude, which made it seem like she was discussing a routine business deal rather than arranging for someone's murder. At one point, she even showed Muhammad photos of her husband, which further revealed her callous disregard for human life. During the conversation, the woman made a stunning admission to Muhammad, revealing that she planned to pay a hitman to kill her husband. This confession was a crucial breakthrough for the detective, as it confirmed the woman's involvement in soliciting a murder. However, the detective knew that to build a stronger case, they needed to gather more evidence. The woman told Muhammad that she would withdraw $1,000 in cash and hand it over to the hitman later. After discussing the plan with Muhammad, the woman left the mobile gas station and drove home. The detectives followed her to gather information about her address. A records check revealed that the address belonged to Dahlia Doe, not Delilah as they had initially thought. With this new information, the detectives ran a background check on the vehicle Dahlia used to meet Muhammad at the gas station. This allowed them to obtain the registered owner's name, which was her husband, Mike Doe. To their friends, Mike and Dahlia seemed like a loving and happy couple. The two had met when Mike was browsing the internet at work, looking for something to do when he was feeling bored. Mike found a website that offered escort services and decided to hire one. This decision would have a profound impact on his life. When the escort arrived, Mike was immediately drawn to her physical attractiveness. He thought she was exceptionally beautiful, and he felt an undeniable attraction between them. As they spent more time together, they quickly developed a strong connection, effortlessly engaging in friendly conversations over the next few days. Mike and Dahlia's friendship blossomed into a romantic relationship after they spent a weekend together. They quickly realized their feelings for each other went beyond friendship. As a result, they became a committed couple. A few months into their relationship, they stumbled upon an engagement ring store, which led to a conversation about marriage, a topic they had previously discussed. Mike was drawn to the idea of spending his life with Dahlia and decided to purchase a ring, symbolizing his commitment to their future together. Despite their relationship moving quickly, Mike was deeply happy and in love. Before meeting Dahlia, Mike had a troubled past. In 2001, he was sentenced to 2 years in prison in Broward County, Florida, for grand theft, fraud, and false telephone sales. At the time, Mike was struggling with drug addiction and desperation for money, which he later acknowledged was no excuse for his mistakes. Mike served his 2-year sentence and was given 28 years of probation. The court granted Mike a lengthy probation period to give him time to pay back the significant amount of money he owed. However, when Mike returned home, he was unsure of how he would repay the debt. Determined to settle his debt, Mike found a job as a cook at a local restaurant, earning $350 weekly, which was insufficient to make a notable dent in the substantial amount he owed. To improve his financial situation and secure an early release from probation, Mike sought a better-paying job. A friend offered him an office job near his home, allowing him to transition from cooking to email marketing. As Mike and Dahlia started dating, he eventually confided in her about his probation and the limitations it imposed. Mike explained that he required permission to leave the state while on probation. Dahlia, who had a strong desire to travel, expressed her wish to explore the world with Mike. To help Mike become debt-free, Dahlia offered to provide $91,000 if he paid the remaining balance, enabling them to clear the debt and start the life Dahlia had envisioned. Dahlia, a successful real estate agent, was financially stable and able to help her partner Mike pay off his debt and clear his name. Mike consulted his attorney to understand the process, and the attorney advised him to gather the necessary funds to be released from probation. To facilitate the payment, Dahlia and Mike agreed that she would send the money from her Bank of America account to the attorney. Dahlia informed Mike that she had transferred the funds, but when Mike followed up with the attorney, he was told that the payment had not been received. Mike waited a day and then asked Dahlia about the status of the transfer. However, Dahlia insisted that she had sent the money, leaving Mike frustrated and unsure about what was happening. Mike's concern grew, so he contacted his attorney again, only to be told that they still hadn't received anything. Dahlia claimed to have sent the money to the attorney, but couldn't explain the delay. 2 days had passed since the transaction, but the attorney remained without the funds. Mike asked Dahlia for proof of the transaction, needing the receipt to verify the details. However, Dahlia suspected foul play, suggesting the attorney might have stolen the money. She vowed to find the missing sum, while Mike sought to move past the misunderstanding. Meanwhile, a supervisor at the Bon Beach Police Department reached out to Sergeant Whitey Jean for assistance. Sergeant Jean met with a detective working on Dahlia Deo's case. The detective briefed Sergeant Whitey Jean on the case, revealing that Dahlia wanted to hire someone to kill her husband. The detective explained that Dahlia was waiting for a call from the would-be hitman, and asked Sergeant Whitey Jean to pretend to be the hitman and arrange a meeting with her. Sergeant Whitey Jean agreed to help with the investigation and took on the role of the hitman. As the hitman, he contacted Dahlia and demanded a $3,000 advance and the key to her house. The detective had requested the key as part of their plan to make Dahlia believe the murder would happen at her home. However, Dahlia was unhappy about the payment demand and called Muhammad, the informant, to express her concerns. During the call, the detective overheard Dahlia's fears and worried that they might have scared her off. They feared that Dahlia might change her mind and find someone else to commit the crime. On August 3, 2009, Dahlia met with Sergeant Whitey Jean, who was posing as a hitman, in a CVS parking lot. However, Dahlia didn't bring the agreed-upon payment, which led Sergeant Whitey Jean to warn her that if he had to wait until after the murder to get paid, she would need to give him $7,000 in cash up front. Sergeant Whitey Jean explained to Dahlia that he would plan the staged break-in and murder of her husband Mike on Wednesday morning, taking advantage of the recent robberies in the area. He outlined his plan to make it look like a legitimate break-in, shooting Mike twice in the head to make it appear like a robbery gone wrong. Sergeant Whitey Jean also told Dahlia that he would contact her a few days after the murder, as he knew the police would be closely monitoring her activities in the aftermath of the crime. Sergeant Whitey Jean cautioned Dahlia that the delay was essential to avoid raising suspicions and maintaining the operation's secrecy. During their conversation, he gave her multiple opportunities to withdraw from the murder-for-hire plot. However, Dahlia expressed her unwavering commitment, stating she was 5,000% certain about her decision to have her husband killed. Dahlia provided Sergeant Whitey Jean with crucial details, revealing that her husband, Mike, followed a predictable morning routine, walking the dog at a specific time and leaving the house unlocked. This information was vital to the success of the plan. She also told the sergeant that she would create an alibi by going to the gym during the murder, ensuring her absence from the house when the crime would take place. The sergeant instructed Dahlia to arrive at the gym by 6 a.m. and informed her that he would enter her home at 6:30 a.m. After speaking with Dahlia, Sergeant Whitey Jean was taken aback by her extraordinary cruelty, having encountered few individuals in his line of work who exhibited a similar level of ruthlessness. The detective wanted to create a fake crime scene at Dahlia and Mike's home to see how Dahlia would react on the day of the alleged hit. To do this, they needed to know Dahlia's whereabouts. At 5:30 a.m., Dahlia told Mike she was going to the gym, which Mike found unusual since she had never gone that early before. However, he didn't think much of it and continued with his morning routine. The detective kept an eye on Dahlia to make sure she went to the gym and went inside. This confirmed that the plan could move forward. But before setting up the fake crime scene, the detective needed to fill Mike Dio in on what was happening. About 30 minutes after Dahlia left for the gym, loud banging noises were heard at Mike and Dahlia's house, prompting Mike to rush to the door. When he opened it, he was surprised to find several police officers standing there. Confused and worried, Mike asked them what was going on. The detective informed Mike that his wife, Dahlia, had tried to hire a hitman to kill him, but the hitman was actually an undercover cop. The entire situation was a setup to look like a murder-for-hire plot. Mike was in shock when the police told him that his wife had hired someone to kill him. The detectives took him to the police station, leaving his home to be staged as a crime scene with fake police tape and lights. The detectives then called Dahlia, telling her that they needed to question her about an incident involving her husband. When she arrived home, she found her house surrounded by police cars and crime scene tape. The detective told her that her husband had been murdered, and she broke down in tears. However, the detective noticed that Dahlia's reaction seemed unusual, as she didn't produce any tears. The detective began questioning Dahlia about suspects, trying to get her to confess to hiring the hitman. Dahlia claimed that her marriage was fine and that Mike's problems with probation and a stock fraud conviction might have led to his murder. Unbeknownst to her, Mike was watching from another room. The detective then revealed that they knew the truth behind the murder and brought in Sergeant Whitey Jean, who Dahlia claimed she didn't know. The detective arrested Dahlia for solicitation of murder, revealing that the hitman was an undercover cop. Mike was given the chance to confront Dahlia, but she refused to admit her guilt. Dahlia's trial took place on April 26, 2011, where Mike testified against her for 3 days. Her defense argued that the entire plot was a publicity stunt for a reality TV show, but Mike denied any involvement. Mike denied any interest in reality TV shows and claimed he had no involvement in Dahlia's alleged plot to kill him. He also stated he had no knowledge of public relations. After the trial, the jury found Dahlia guilty of solicitation to commit first-degree murder with a firearm, and she was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Mike was relieved by the verdict, but also felt a sense of closure, knowing justice had been served. However, Dahlia's attorneys appealed the conviction, citing a juror's remark about Dahlia poisoning Mike's Starbucks drink, which was not presented as evidence during the trial. The appellate court reversed the conviction, and a second trial was held. Despite the state's confidence in their case, the jury reached a hung verdict, resulting in a mistrial. A third trial was held, and Dahlia was again found guilty, this time receiving a 16-year prison sentence. Dahlia's defense team continued to appeal her conviction, but the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review her case. Her attorneys plan to file a motion with a federal judge to review the third trial for constitutional violations, which would be their last chance to secure a new trial. Despite her conviction, Dahlia has become a respected figure in prison, leading a Bible study group and earning praise from fellow inmates. She is separated from her young son, who lives with his grandmother, and deeply misses being with him. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Brooke Skylar Richardson. In Ohio, the Richardson family, consisting of Kim, Scott, and their children, Jackson and Skylar, seemed like a typical family. Skylar was a cheerleader who struggled with an eating disorder from a young age. Her mother Kim first noticed this when Skylar was 12 years old and refused to buy gum with more than 5 calories. As a flyer on the cheerleading squad, Skylar felt pressured to maintain a certain weight. This obsession with her body image led to a constant fear of gaining weight. During cheerleading season, Skylar started throwing up after meals to control her weight, which only made her issues worse. When the season ended, her struggles intensified. Skylar experienced episodes of binge eating, followed by periods of starvation or extreme dieting. Her parents grew concerned, but Skylar shut down whenever they tried to talk to her about it. They sought professional help from various doctors and therapists, who eventually diagnosed Skylar with body dysmorphia, a condition where she obsessively focused on a perceived flaw in her appearance. In July 2016, Skylar began dating a friend's cousin, but the relationship didn't last long. By January 2017, she had moved on to a new boyfriend, Brandon, and seemed genuinely happy and healthy. Her parents noticed her weight gain and thought her eating disorder was under control. In February, Skylar picked out her prom dress, a tightly fitted gown that required her to be laced into it. During a family vacation in mid-March, she wore a 2-piece bathing suit and looked wonderful. Her mom, Kim, wanted her to start taking birth control pills to protect her health. In mid-April 2017, Skylar visited her mother's gynecologist to obtain a prescription for birth control. However, during the visit, the doctor informed Skylar that she was approximately 8 months pregnant. Skylar requested the doctor not to tell anyone, and her mother remained unaware of the real reason behind her tears. Skylar and her boyfriend Brandon attended the prom on May 5th, despite her advanced pregnancy. 2 months later, on July 14, 2017, the police showed up at the Richardson home. They informed Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, that they needed to speak to the teenager about something she may have witnessed. The police officers assured the parents that Skylar was not in trouble and took her at their word. Scott decided to drive Skylar to the police station, unsure of what awaited them. The police wanted to question Skylar regarding a call they received from a gynecologist's office. A patient of an OB/GYN doctor gave birth to a stillborn baby and buried it in their backyard. The police were informed and took Skylar, the patient, into custody for questioning. Her father was not allowed to be present during the initial interview. The police read Skylar her rights and shared the details of the doctor's report. According to the doctor, Skylar had discovered her pregnancy on April 26th, but later reported that the baby was not alive and had been buried in the backyard. Skylar admitted to the police that she had given birth to a stillborn baby girl on May 7th, 2017. She explained that she delivered the baby in the bathroom, noticed it was not breathing, and had no heartbeat. Feeling the need to bury the baby, she retreated to the backyard, dug a shallow grave, and buried the body. To mark the spot, she placed a vase with a flower at the burial site. The police informed Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, about the true reason for her detention. They were shocked to learn that Skylar had been pregnant, as they had no idea. They expressed sadness that Skylar had gone through this ordeal alone and without their support. Skylar revealed that she had named the baby Annabelle and claimed the father was a close friend's cousin, whom she briefly dated. Crime scene investigators searched the Richardson backyard, removing weeds and debris to uncover the baby's remains. Despite the challenges, they found several bones, including pieces of the skull, which they carefully collected and preserved. After more than 5 hours of questioning, Skylar and her parents were allowed to return home. However, 6 days later, the police contacted Skylar again, informing her that they had received new information from the coroner's office. They claimed that the baby's bones showed signs of burning, which Skylar vehemently denied. She insisted that she would never harm her child. The police suggested that Skylar might have tried to cremate the baby to hide the evidence, but she continued to deny any wrongdoing. However, Skylar suddenly changed her story, admitting that she may have used a lighter to try and cremate the baby's remains. She also stated that the baby might have been born alive and made a noise or even cried before dying. Skylar confessed to holding the newborn too tightly, which might have contributed to its death. During a lengthy interrogation, the police gathered enough evidence to arrest Skylar on a charge of reckless homicide. They believed she had suffocated her baby. After presenting the case to a grand jury, Skylar was indicted and arrested for aggravated murder, which carries a mandatory life sentence in Ohio. At her arraignment, Skylar pleaded not guilty to additional charges of voluntary manslaughter, abuse of a corpse, and endangering children. She spent the weekend in jail until her family secured a $50,000 bond. Skylar became the center of a media frenzy following her child's tragic death. The public judged and scrutinized every move she and her family made, taking a toll on their well-being. They retreated to the safety of their home, but even stepping outside became difficult due to threats and photographers. Despite her defense attorneys believing Skylar gave a false confession, the prosecution pressed forward with their case. Even when the medical examiner retracted her initial report of burning, the prosecution clung to Skylar's admission that she had attempted to cremate the remains. Throughout this period, Skylar's family endured immense stress and fear. The public scrutiny and threats made their lives unbearable, and they struggled to navigate a world under constant scrutiny. Skylar's defense attorneys worked tirelessly to defend her against the charges. Skylar's family raised the $50,000 bail, but as a condition of her release, she was ordered to wear an ankle bracelet. She remained confined to her home, avoiding public appearances. Over 12 months, Skylar's life took a different path. Her university plans were put on hold as she awaited trial for her baby's murder. The charges were serious, and the defense filed a motion to move the trial to a different county, but it was denied. Skylar faced the trial in the original jurisdiction, grappling with the emotional and psychological impact of the allegations and her isolation. Spending time with her dogs provided comfort and companionship as she awaited her trial. Her family stood by her, believing in her innocence and hoping the truth would come to light. Despite the challenges, Skylar remained determined to fight for her freedom. In July 2019, the state offered a plea deal. If Skylar pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, they would withdraw the aggravated murder charge. Skylar's parents were conflicted about the decision, but after careful consideration, Skylar turned down the plea deal. This decision terrified her parents, who wondered if she made the right choice, but they knew it was her decision, not theirs. Skylar went on trial on September 3, 2019, for the murder of her newborn baby girl. The prosecution presented as evidence a text message Skylar sent to her mother shortly after giving birth, saying she was happy and excited that her belly had returned to its normal size. They claimed this showed Skylar was relieved to be rid of her baby. The prosecution alleged that Skylar sent more texts to her mother and boyfriend within 24 hours of the baby's death, conveying her excitement and happiness. They pointed to phrases like, "I'm so excited," and "I feel so much better this morning," as proof of her guilt. The state believed Skylar was thrilled about the baby's death and attempted to hide her guilt. The prosecution also claimed Skylar had no intention of keeping her baby and presented evidence that she had searched online for ways to get rid of the baby. They alleged that Skylar's mother had threatened that her life would end if she became pregnant, which instilled fear in Skylar. On the third day of the trial, a doctor testified that the baby's death was a violent homicide, but admitted she couldn't determine when the baby's skull fractures occurred. The defense challenged the doctor's findings, suggesting she may have been biased. The defense also questioned the doctor's methods, pointing out that she didn't examine the remains under a microscope or consult with an obstetrician. Another doctor, a fetal medicine specialist, testified that it was unlikely the baby was stillborn, citing Skylar's admission that she felt the baby moving inside her. The prosecution's case included shocking evidence, including images of the deceased baby's remains, which visibly affected Skylar during the trial. Skylar's reaction to seeing pictures of her baby's remains was to stare straight ahead, avoiding eye contact. This stoic behavior contrasted with her emotional response the previous day when the judge entered the room. Skylar's defense attorneys argued that her life was far from perfect, even before the murder accusation. They claimed the prosecution's evidence was incomplete and misleading, and some texts were taken out of context. They emphasized that Skylar's frequent use of certain language did not prove she murdered her daughter. The defense highlighted Skylar's mental health struggles, particularly her long battle with an eating disorder. They presented evidence of her regular visits to a psychologist and nutritionist, along with pictures showing her varying weights and appearances. They argued that despite her physical state, Skylar tried to comfort and care for the lifeless body after giving birth. Skylar's attorney explained that she intended to tell her family about the pregnancy, but never had the chance. According to her doctor, she had 8 to 10 weeks before delivery and planned to attend prom and graduate before telling her mother, whom she knew would be unsupportive. An obstetrician testified that the baby was stillborn, and Skylar's description of the baby's appearance suggested it was not a healthy newborn. The doctor pointed out that Skylar only gained 15 pounds during pregnancy, possibly restricting the baby's development due to her eating disorder. The defense aimed to cast doubt on Skylar's statements to the police, suggesting she only told them what they wanted to hear. They argued that other factors may have contributed to the baby's death, and Skylar did not harm the baby. Skylar Richardson's trial lasted for 1 week, after which the jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a verdict. She was acquitted of aggravated murder, involuntary manslaughter, and child endangerment, but convicted of abuse of a corpse, a felony that carries a sentence of up to 1 year in prison. The judge ordered her to be held in jail until her sentencing hearing, which took place the next day. During the sentencing hearing, Skylar apologized for her actions and acknowledged the harm she had caused. The judge strongly admonished her for her role in the tragic loss of her baby, believing that if she had made better decisions during her pregnancy, her child would still be alive today. The judge sentenced her to 3 years probation for abuse of a corpse, emphasizing that her actions were morally reprehensible and illegal. In November 2020, a judge granted her request to terminate her probation 2 years early, acknowledging her progress and agreeing that she no longer required supervision. Since being acquitted, Skylar has taken advantage of her opportunity to demonstrate her rehabilitation. She has completed 2 semesters of college and has been working part-time at the law firm that represented her. Although she has faced challenges in finding employment due to her probationary status, Skylar remains determined to pursue her career goals, including attending law school and becoming a public defender. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Holly Kemp. Alexandra Holly Elizabeth Kemp was born October 11, 1982, in Leawood. She was the oldest of 3 children and the only daughter of her parents. After graduating high school with honors, Alexandra enrolled at Kansas State University. Following her freshman year, she returned to her hometown of Leawood for summer break. During her break, Alexandra took a part-time job at a local outdoor swimming pool near her parents' house, where her younger brother Tyler already worked. The pool was a quiet neighborhood spot, catering mainly to local residents, and it still operates today. On June 18, 2002, Alexandra reported to work on an overcast day because resulted in fewer visitors than usual. At 5 p.m., Tyler arrived at the pool to start his shift, but his sister Alexandra was nowhere to be found. Her phone and purse were still on the table where she usually sat, which made Tyler confused and worried. He immediately called his parents to report that Alexandra had vanished. Their father, Roger Kemp, rushed to the scene and began searching for his daughter. He first checked the pool, but it was empty. Next, he went to the small pump room near the pool, which contained equipment for water purification, a ladder, and other items. Upon entering the pump room, Roger didn't see anything out of the ordinary at first. However, he soon noticed a leg protruding from under a tarp. As he lifted the tarp, he was met with a horrific sight: his daughter Alexandra, brutally beaten and naked from the waist down, with multiple bruises on her face and body. Roger quickly called 911 and spoke with the operator. When the ambulance arrived, Roger was performing CPR on his daughter. The paramedics took Alexandra to the hospital, but despite their best efforts, she sadly did not survive. Alexandra was declared dead shortly after arrival at the hospital. An examination revealed that the cause of death was strangulation, despite the presence of multiple severe injuries. A thorough investigation found no evidence of forced intimacy, although her body was partially unclothed. The police collected DNA samples from Alexandra's body and secured the pool area, searching for clues to identify the perpetrator. Evidence of a struggle was evident in the room where Roger discovered Alexandra's body, including her flip-flops found in separate locations. Additionally, an open bottle of antiseptic gel and its cap were found at the scene. A few days later, while the police continued to investigate, Alexandra's family and hundreds of mourners gathered to pay their respects at a funeral ceremony. Phil Howes, Alexandra's boyfriend since high school, was initially suspected in her death. As a pool administrator, he worked the morning shift on the day of her death, and Alexandra arrived at noon to start her 5-hour shift. Although Phil often stayed after work to spend time with Alexandra, he left promptly after his shift that day because they had plans for the evening. Despite being an early suspect, Phil had a solid alibi and was quickly cleared by the police. In an interview with detectives, Phil mentioned that Alexandra often felt uncomfortable being alone at work because some of the lawn maintenance workers would stare at her and try to flirt. The police investigated the lawn workers, but each of them had an alibi. However, the inquiry wasn't entirely fruitless. Several workers reported seeing a suspicious man with a video camera lurking in the bushes near the pool the day before Alexandra's death, apparently watching the female lifeguards in swimsuits. The police were given conflicting reports about Alexandra's final hours. Some people said she left the scene in an old Ford pickup truck, while others mentioned different circumstances. A study of Alexandra's mobile phone activity revealed that she had made plans with a friend, Laurel, to meet on the day she died. However, Alexandra didn't show up. When Laurel went to the police station to give her account of events, she explained that Alexandra had asked her to come to the pool to keep her company until her shift ended. According to Laurel, the pool was empty that day due to the poor weather, which made Alexandra anxious. When Laurel arrived at the pool at around 2:30 p.m., she didn't see Alexandra anywhere. Instead, a man she didn't know emerged from the pool house and waved at her with a smile. Laurel thought this man might be Alexandra's boss, and she decided to leave so as not to get her friend in trouble for socializing during work hours. At the time, she had no reason to think that anything was amiss. The police investigation led them away from Alexandra's workplace and to a completely different suspect. As a witness, Laurel provided a detailed description of the person she believed committed the crime. The police used this description to create a sketch of the suspect, who was identified as a white man around 30 years old, with a stocky build, short brown hair, and driving a 1980 Ford pickup truck. The suspect's identity was narrowed down when someone recognized the description as matching James Strader, a local mechanic who owned an old Ford pickup truck. James was questioned by the police and appeared to match the sketch, but he denied any involvement in Alexandra's death. His employer verified his alibi, stating that James was at work on the day of the murder. As a result, James was released from custody. While the police had eliminated James as a suspect, forensic analysis of evidence collected from the crime scene revealed male DNA on an antiseptic gel tube and on Alexandra's body. Unfortunately, the DNA did not match anyone in the police database, leaving the case still unsolved. Alexandra's family, friends, and boyfriend were ruled out as suspects after DNA tests showed no match with the DNA samples found on her body. The investigation was driven by Alexandra's father, Roger Kemp, who was determined to find his daughter's killer. After losing his child, Roger felt like he had lost his purpose in life. However, he found a new reason to keep going: justice for Alexandra. In an interview, Roger explained his approach: "You can either give up or keep fighting. I chose to fight." Impressed by his dedication, the police department gave Roger a workspace where he could collect and share information and collaborate with the investigators. As they explored all available leads, Roger and the investigators contacted the popular TV show America's Most Wanted and asked them to feature Alexandra's case. The show's producers agreed, and her story was aired. The episode generated hundreds of calls from viewers with potential tips. Although the authorities thoroughly investigated each lead, none of them led to a breakthrough, and the case stalled once again. In February 2003, 8 months after Alexandra's death, a promising new lead emerged. Following a thorough investigation, police in Utah apprehended a suspect. 3 separate witnesses, including 2 women and a 14-year-old girl, came forward to report being forced into intimate encounters with a man. He had managed to evade capture initially, but was eventually tracked down and arrested in Utah. The arrested individual was identified as James Strader, the same person who had been questioned by Kansas police earlier. Notably, James bore a strong physical resemblance to the suspect's composite sketch. James was questioned by the police, but they failed to collect his DNA sample at the time. This might have been because his employer had convinced the police that James was at work on the day of the crime and had not left the premises. Despite this, James denied any involvement in Alexandra Kemp's death. Although he resembled the suspect in the composite sketch, James claimed he had not been near the pool on the day of the crime. He eventually provided a DNA sample for analysis. The results indicates that his DNA did not match the DNA found on Alexandra's body or the antiseptic gel tube. James was later imprisoned for unrelated charges, and the investigation into Alexandra Kemp's death hit a dead end once again. A year after Alexandra's death, the police still had no leads. Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, and Phil House, her boyfriend, continued to fight for justice. Phil, who was also the president of the student community, sent the composite sketch of the suspect to students at other universities via email and asked them to watch an episode of America's Most Wanted that featured Alexandra Kemp's case. A year had passed, but the police and relatives' efforts had yielded no results in the Alexandra Kemp case. Undeterred, Roger Kemp, Alexandra's father, continued his quest for justice. He reached out to the America's Most Wanted program again, requesting a rerun of the episode about Alexandra's death. The show's creators asked if there were any new developments, and although Roger replied that there were none, his determination impressed them, leading to the episode being aired again. The rerun generated a fresh wave of calls to the police, prompting Roger to offer a $25,000 reward for any information that could help identify the person responsible for his daughter's death. The city of Leawood authorities increased the reward to $50,000. Roger also distributed flyers featuring his daughter's photo, a sketch of the suspect, and details about the reward. As Roger drove along the highway, he noticed billboards and realized they could be an effective way to raise awareness about the case. He began contacting advertising agencies to inquire about the cost of posting the information on a billboard. When he called the Lamar Advertising Company, the owner refused to take his money, offering to display the information on multiple billboards for free instead. Roger decided to publicize a sketch of the suspect and reward information on billboards along a major highway. The police received hundreds of tips, which took time to investigate. Notably, multiple tips mentioned the same individual, Teddy Hoover, who owned an old Ford pickup truck and worked in pool maintenance. His appearance matched the suspect's sketch, making it unlikely to be a coincidence. The police launched a search for Teddy Hoover and found his address in Kansas. When they arrived, Teddy answered the door, appearing surprised and nervous. However, this reaction didn't necessarily imply guilt, as many people become nervous when confronted by the police. When questioned about his whereabouts on June 18, 2002, Teddy claimed he couldn't remember, which was understandable given the year time lapse. Teddy denied any involvement in maintaining the pool where Alexandra worked. Nevertheless, the detectives asked him to provide a voluntary DNA sample to rule him out as a suspect. Teddy declined, stating he needed to consult with a lawyer first. He promised to contact the police after speaking with his attorney. The next day, Teddy's lawyer reached out to the investigators, expressing his client's concerns about his DNA sample being added to a database. Teddy reportedly believed in various conspiracy theories and feared that if he cooperated with the police, they would use the information against him in other cases. In an effort to alleviate his concerns, the investigators promised not to enter his DNA into any database and only use it to compare with the DNA found on Alexandra Kemp. The lawyer agreed to speak with his client and said he would call back. As they waited for the call, the police reviewed the case materials again and stumbled upon a piece of paper in one of the folders with a name that caught their attention. On the day of Alexandra's death, detectives began questioning onlookers who had gathered by the pool, trying to determine if anyone had seen anything suspicious. Interestingly, one of the people they spoke with was Teddy Hoover, who had claimed he had never been to the crime scene before. As the investigation continued, detectives grew increasingly confident that Teddy Hoover might be the man they had been searching for over the past 2 years. After several days, investigators contacted Teddy's lawyer to ask if his client was willing to provide a DNA sample. However, the lawyer responded by stating that his client had refused his services and broken off contact. Police immediately went to Teddy's house, but he had already escaped. As a result, the 29-year-old suspect was placed on the National Wanted list. Despite the efforts of the detectives, Teddy managed to evade capture for months. Billboards featuring his image were still up, but the search had yielded nothing. It wasn't until September 2004, when an anonymous caller contacted the police, that a new lead emerged. According to the caller, he knew the name of Teddy's girlfriend, with whom Teddy was living in Kansas. Detectives sought to locate Laura Barr, a woman connected to Teddy Hoover, but discovered she had left the state at the same time he escaped. This led them to investigate further. The U.S. Postal Service informed the Kansas State Police that Laura was receiving mail in Litchfield, Connecticut, along with a man named Benjamin Appleby, at the same address. The house where they resided was secluded and located in a rural area. Authorities suspected that Benjamin Appleby might be an alias for Teddy Hoover. To aid in the investigation, detectives from Leawood contacted the Connecticut State Police, requesting their assistance in locating Benjamin. It was discovered that he had a prior record in Connecticut, with an outstanding arrest warrant stemming from a 1997 incident where he had exposed himself to a schoolgirl. However, Benjamin had evaded capture and fled the state. With the existing warrant, detectives proceeded to the address associated with Benjamin's mail. Upon arrival, they found him at home and immediately took him into custody. As suspected, Benjamin Appleby was confirmed to be Teddy Hoover. It was revealed that while detectives in Kansas had been seeking a DNA sample from Teddy in connection with Alexandra Kemp's death, he had returned to Connecticut and resumed using his real name, attempting to maintain a low profile and escape notice. To apprehend Benjamin, detectives from Leawood traveled to Connecticut, anticipating that he would once again claim innocence. Before bringing him in for questioning, they devised a plan to unsettle him. They filled the interrogation room with crime scene photos and pictures of Alexandra, and placed folders with his name on the table, creating the illusion that the investigation had substantial evidence against him. When Benjamin entered the interrogation room, he was visibly shaken and unable to speak. A detective confronted him, inquiring about the implications of obtaining his DNA sample. Shortly after, Benjamin broke down in tears, confessing to Alexandra's death. He then recounted the events of the fateful June day, explaining that he had noticed Alexandra, found her attractive, and attempted to flirt with her. When she entered the pump room, he followed her, locked the door, and trapped her inside. When Benjamin touched she fought back, leaving him feeling humiliated. In a fit of anger, he attacked her, beating and strangling her until she lost consciousness. Benjamin then attempted to take advantage of her body, undressing her partially. He retrieved a tube of antiseptic gel from a first aid kit, intending to use it as a lubricant. However, just as he was about to proceed, the sound of a car horn distracted him. The victim's friend, who was waiting in a car behind a fence, had noticed something was amiss and sounded the horn. Fearing he would be caught, Benjamin hastily covered the body and fled the scene. Later, Benjamin returned to the area, where he encountered Alexandra's friend, whom he greeted with a smile and a wave, trying to appear nonchalant. He then got into his pickup truck and drove away. Hours later, Benjamin returned to the crime scene again, this time blending in with the crowd of onlookers gathered near the pool. The DNA evidence ultimately led to Benjamin's downfall. Tests revealed that the DNA found on the tube of antiseptic gel and on Alexandra's body matched Benjamin's. Thanks in large part to the efforts of investigator Roger Kemp, the police were finally able to identify the man responsible for Alexandra's murder, more than 2 years after the crime was committed. Benjamin Appleby claimed he initially wanted to plead guilty to avoid putting Alexandra's family through further emotional distress. However, at his first court hearing, he suddenly declared his innocence, stating that his confession was made under duress. Despite this, DNA analysis revealed that his DNA was the only sample found on the victim's body, making it difficult to dispute his involvement. Benjamin's lawyers attempted to argue that their client did not intentionally take Alexandra's life, admitting that he was responsible for her death but claiming it was not premeditated. However, forensic experts pointed out that Benjamin had strangled Alexandra for approximately 10 minutes, during which time he could have stopped but chose not to. The prosecution argued that Benjamin's sole intention was to observe Alexandra. On the day of the incident, June 18, 2002, the pool area was empty due to cloudy weather, allowing Benjamin to take advantage of the situation. He was found guilty by a jury in December 2005 and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 50 years, as well as an additional 19 years for attempting to force Alexandra into intimacy. In 2019, Benjamin appealed the decision, but the court upheld the life imprisonment sentence for first-degree murder. The Court of Appeal also ruled that the attempt to force Alexandra into intimacy was already taken into account during the initial sentencing. Benjamin was sentenced twice for the same crime, prompting the court to overturn the second conviction. However, even if Benjamin is released on parole, he will be 81 years old by that time. The authorities involved in the case credit Roger Kemp's persistence for helping them catch the culprit. While Benjamin was in prison, Roger and his wife established a self-defense program for girls, teaching thousands of girls and women across the country basic self-defense techniques. Roger Kemp's tireless efforts to bring attention to the case and his work in creating a safe community did not go unnoticed. He was awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal by Barack Obama at the White House. Until his passing at 77 on March 1, 2022, Roger continued to work for the foundation he established in his daughter's name. His ultimate goal was to make a difference in at least one person's life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Victoria Nazirova. Olga Tsvyk, a 35-year-old Ukrainian immigrant eyelash artist, reported a robbery at her home. The incident occurred on September 2, 2016. Olga Tsvyk called the police after discovering that several valuables had been stolen from her bedroom. When the police arrived at the scene, Olga Tsvyk explained that she had gone to the hospital earlier due to severe dizziness and nausea. To investigate the circumstances surrounding the incident, the police conducted a detailed interview with Olga Tsvyk. During the interview, she recalled a recent unpleasant encounter with a client named Victoria Narova, who had come to her home to request urgent eyelash extensions. When Victoria came to Olga Tsvyk's home to request urgent eyelash extensions, Olga Tsvyk told Victoria that she only did eyelash extensions in the salon and did not take clients at home. However, explaining to Victoria was useless, and Olga Tsvyk had to agree to take her in. During the investigation, it was discovered that Victoria had come to Olga Tsvyk's apartment, bringing 3 slices of cheesecake from a famous local bakery. Victoria enjoyed 2 slices and insisted that Olga Tsbyk eat the 3rd slice. After drinking tea and eating the cheesecake, Olga Tsbyk began to feel unwell. After Victoria left, Olga Tsbyk suffered from severe nausea, eventually passing out for about 30 minutes. After regaining consciousness, Olga Tsbyk called an ambulance and was taken to the hospital by ambulance. However, medical tests found nothing unusual in her blood. When Olga Tsbyk returned home, she discovered that several valuables were missing and reported the theft to the police. The police found Olga Tsbyk listless and looking unwell. The police suspected that Olga Tsbyk was under the influence of drugs and had made up the story. Despite the police's suspicions, Olga Tsbyk maintained that she had not taken any medication, and Olga Tsbyk believed that the cheesecake she had eaten was the cause of her condition. Possibly poisoning. When searching the scene, police discovered a box of cookies from a local store in the trash, which Olga Tsbyk identified as the packaging for the cheesecake Victoria had brought. Police collected the remaining baking residue from the cheesecake, which was taken for in-room analysis to determine whether the cheesecake was the cause of Olga Tsbyk's health problems, but the forensic examination revealed nothing suspicious. Despite this, Olga Tsbyk insisted that the cheesecake was the cause of her condition. Olga Tsbyk mentioned that she had been to the hospital and that doctors had examined her body when she was admitted, and the police had contacted the medical facility to ask about Olga Tsbyk's condition and the test results. However, the doctors refused to provide information, citing patient confidentiality. The police considered this a reason not to believe Olga Tsbyk. The customer that Olga Tsbyk had told them about could not be found, so the case was adjourned. These details were told by a neighbor who the very next day noticed a suspicious woman at Olga's apartment. This woman came and went several times, hanging around the beauty master's apartment until she came face to face with her neighbor. The strange woman said that her friend Olga was sick and hurriedly left the house. The neighbor saw that the door to Olga's apartment was open and looked in to check on her. It was unbearably stuffy in the victim's apartment. The heating was on full blast despite the 30-degree summer heat. Olga was alive, but she was unconscious. She was lying on her bed, but she was wearing an unusual combination of clothes revealing underwear and warm sports pants. When the detectives heard about this, they had the feeling that someone was deliberately trying to change the victim's clothes. Scattered around Olga were pills containing a powerful drug. It looked as if Olga had taken the pills with the intention of taking her own life. A neighbor immediately notified 911, describing the strange woman as dark-haired, attractive-looking, and very similar to Olga. After learning new details, investigators became convinced that the doppelganger woman was not a figment of Olga's imagination. Then the detectives took up the case more actively. Everything they saw in the apartment seemed to be a description of a crime scene they wanted to frame as a voluntary demise. Detectives believed that the persistent cheesecake customer named Victoria Narova was involved. The police began searching for Victoria, but they had no leads, no information about who she was, or her photograph. Later, however, the department was approached by a private detective, a former police officer who had long been following the con artist's violent activities. He had already tracked Victoria online, where she advertised escort services on a dating site and through social media. The private investigator believed that the woman used online promotion to find victims for her crimes, and the scheme worked perfectly. Victoria would arrive at the home of the next client, then she would drug the person with psychoactive substances so that they would lose consciousness. After that, she would take everything of value and then go into hiding. This activity could have been concealed indefinitely if not for this tragic circumstance. Meanwhile, Alsvik finally recovered from the unpleasant events. Then, having discharged from the hospital, she shared on her page in social networks the story of poisoning. After that, one of her clients unexpectedly told that she knew a man named Ruben Barakov who was in a similar story. Ruben was the owner of a dry cleaner, and the man met Victoria Nazirova on a Russian dating site about a couple of months before Olga's cheesecake poisoning. The new acquaintance invited Ruben to her home and boasted that she was a very good cook. He agreed and came to her place, but as soon as he tasted the dishes, the man lost consciousness. The friend emptied his pockets, took expensive watches, money, and cards. The man was under the influence of a very strong psychoactive substance and sincerely believes that it almost killed him. Later, when he began to regain consciousness, Victoria took him to the dry cleaners, gave him to his colleagues, and told them that he was drunk and then left. From there, only then did Ruben realize that he had been robbed. The private investigator assumed the situation was much more serious, and the two victims of the poisoner were very lucky. In 2017, he worked with a client from Russia to help track down an elusive criminal. Nadia Ford turned to the private detective after the disappearance of her own mother, Alla Alexenko. The girl herself lived in New York, USA, but was born in Russia. Nadia was originally from Kotor. Her mother, Alla Enko, single-handedly brought up her daughter and son, and she had a hard time. She worked 5 jobs to provide for her children. Nadia dreamed of living in the USA since childhood, and her dream came true when the girl came to study in America in 2007. There, she met a guy whom she married and took his surname, Ford. But the marriage did not work out, and the spouse is divorced. Nadia stayed to live in the United States and successfully settled there. She maintained close relations with her mother, who at that time was left alone. Years later, Alla Alexenko went missing in Russia, and Nadia hired a private investigator to find her mother, Alla Alexenko, in 2017. In an effort to find her, Nadia hired a private investigator, who discovered that Victoria had rented a car on the day her mother went missing. The investigator looked into the car's information and found surveillance footage from October 5, 2014. The footage showed the car driving on the highway with 2 people inside, the driver, Victoria, and a motionless woman in the front passenger seat who looked like the missing 54-year-old Alla Alexenko. Nadia believed that the woman in the footage was her mother. Nadia went to the police, who verified that Victoria had indeed rented the car. As a result, the police summoned Victoria for questioning. During an interview with Victoria, she revealed that she had indeed driven the rental car involved on October 5, but said she was alone. Victoria agreed to take a lie detector test. Victoria was released pending the results, but later it turned out that Victoria failed a lie detector test and became the prime suspect in the case. Before the police could arrest her, Victoria took advantage of the opportunity, quickly fleeing the country on the first available flight. Meanwhile, the police expanded the search for the missing Alla Alexenko. Nadia actively participated in the investigation for 6 months, holding out hope that her mother was still alive. During the investigation, the police followed the route of the rented car, which led them to a forest near Victoria's hometown of Armavir. Upon reaching the forest, the police discovered a body about 3 hours away from Alla Alexenko's residence. The body was so badly burned that it was unrecognizable. Nadia identified her mother's body by her teeth. Despite a thorough investigation, the cause of Alla Alexenko's death has not been found. The police issued an arrest warrant for Victoria Nazirova and sent it to Interpol. However, Victoria escaped for a long time. Nadia returned to the United States after attending her mother's funeral in Kotor. For a long time, Nadia struggled to overcome the pain of losing her loved one. Finally, Nadia regained her health and vowed to her mother that she would pursue justice and hold the killer responsible for her mother's death accountable. One day, while surfing the internet, Nadia came across a post on social media. Victoria Nazirova, the prime suspect in her mother's death, was living a lavish life in Mexico, seemingly unconcerned about her wanted status. Nadia informed the U.S. police about Victoria's whereabouts, and the police began an investigation. Nadia then hired a top U.S. private investigator to speed up the investigation. A wealthy friend of Nadia's paid for the detective services, as Nadia could not afford them. At the time, Nadia had been unemployed for months due to her search for her mother. The private investigator analyzed Victoria's social media photos, including recent posts by Victoria. The investigator discovered that Victoria was in the United States. In one selfie, the sunglasses reflected the dashboard of a car. After examining several models, the investigator identified the car as a Chrysler 300. Detectives successfully tracked recent photos of Victoria to the Russian neighborhood of Sheepshead Bay in Brooklyn. By checking a database of similar cars in the area, police were able to narrow down the search and identify the culprit. Despite the challenges, police located Victoria and discovered that she lived with her boyfriend in a complex where the Chrysler was registered in his name. Unaware that Interpol was searching for her worldwide, Victoria posted the photos online without hesitation. Detectives identified Victoria's boyfriend and contacted him. It turned out that the boyfriend had been poisoned by Victoria and was seeking help. Furthermore, Victoria had poisoned her boyfriend's beagle, causing the dog to die. On March 20, 2017, 41-year-old Victoria Nazirova was finally found and arrested. Nadia, the private investigator, and the police were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Leaving Victoria at large posed a significant threat, as she had the potential to harm many more people. When searching Victoria's apartment, the police discovered Olga Tsvyka's identity card. Victoria's main motive for targeting Olga Tsvyka was not only her desire for money and valuables, but Victoria also wanted a passport. Victoria's temporary visa was about to expire and she needed a new ID card to stay in the country and avoid being tried in Russia. The face on Olga Tsvyka's passport bore a strong resemblance to Victoria's. The police suspected that Victoria intended to kill Olga Tsvyka and take her identity. Fortunately, Olga Tsvyka's neighbor intervened, saving her life. When they further examined the poisoned cheesecake in a laboratory, they discovered a banned sedative, which Victoria had added to the cake. The investigation revealed that Victoria had used this sedative to carry out her plot. Victoria would increase the dosage to make the victim unconscious. Olga Tsvyka was lucky to survive the incident. The unusually high temperature in her apartment was not accidental. Victoria deliberately increased the temperature to increase the effect of the sedative, which could have been fatal. Victoria clearly knew the situation in advance. To avoid suspicion, Victoria tried to cover her tracks by increasing the temperature in the house and dressing Olga Tsvyka in warm clothes. After her arrest, Victoria denied all charges, including her involvement in the disappearance and murder of Nadia's mother, as well as the intentional murder of Olga Tsvyka and the other victims. Police said Victoria was a suspect in the theft of 2 fur coats in May 2016, but the case was never solved. After several other incidents, it emerged that Victoria had been involved in the thefts, meeting men online, going to their homes, giving them drugs and stealing from them. Most of the men did not go to the police for fear of publicity, and Victoria escaped conviction. The trial was postponed for about 6 years due to the pandemic and the lengthy preparation of the case file. The case finally went to trial in January 2023, attracting media and public attention. Throughout the trial, Victoria remained silent. The court was forbidden from going into details about Alla Alexenko's death because the crime was committed in another country. Victoria's defense attorney said that there was no direct evidence or testimony linking Victoria to the crime, specifically the poisoning of the cheesecake and forcing Olga Tsvyka to eat it. According to Olga Tsvyka's testimony, Victoria brought 3 pieces of cheesecake to Olga Tsbyky's apartment, ate 2 in front of Olga Tsbyk, and then Olga Tsbyk ate the 3rd piece without hesitation. The prosecution argued that it was not an accident and that Victoria had deliberately added the drug to only 1 slice of the cake, knowing which one it was, and tricked Olga Tsbyk by eating the other 2 slices. After a thorough review of the case, the jury found Victoria Nazirova guilty of second-degree intentional homicide. Although the maximum sentence for this crime was 25 years in prison, the judge reduced the sentence to 21 years. However, by law, Victoria would be eligible for parole after 15 years in prison. Victoria Nazirova had been a sophisticated and stylish woman, but her life changed completely when she was sentenced to prison. The harsh realities of prison life took their toll on Victoria, with inadequate and poor nutrition. A fight in prison left Victoria severely injured, almost losing her sight. Victoria took the prison to court, filing a lawsuit against the prison for negligence on the part of the guards who failed to assist during the violent incident. The case was eventually settled out of court, with Victoria receiving $325,000 in damages. In an interview from prison, Victoria maintained her innocence, denying the charges related to the crimes she committed. Victoria will serve the remainder of her sentence in a U.S. prison before being deported to Russia, where she will stand trial for her alleged involvement in the murder of Alla Alexenko. Alla Alexenko's daughter Nadia has expressed relief that Victoria is facing justice for her actions and will no longer be able to escape punishment. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Sarah Yarborough. Sarah Yarborough was born in Portland on June 12, 1975. Shortly after, her parents relocated to Federal Way, a suburb of Seattle, where she grew up with 2 siblings, forming a strong bond with her youngest brother. From an early age, Sarah demonstrated a keen interest in music and ballet, spending considerable time honing her skills. Her academic prowess earned her a spot in a school program that allowed her to travel to New Zealand twice. As she entered her teenage years, Sarah joined the cheerleading team at her high school, where she developed a large social circle. She was renowned for her kind and compassionate nature, often lending a helping hand to those in need. On Saturday, December 14, 1991, 16-year-old Sarah was supposed to meet her cheerleading team at the school building, where a bus would pick them up for an event. She drove her father's car to the school, but arrived at the wrong time, thinking the bus would arrive at 8 a.m. when it was actually scheduled for 9 a.m. As her friends gradually arrived at the meeting point, they couldn't find Sarah anywhere. Some students noticed her car in the parking lot, but she wasn't inside. Even when the bus arrived, Sarah was still missing. Her friends found this strange, but they had no way to contact her since they didn't have mobile phones at the time. Around the same time, 2 12-year-old children were exploring the wooded area behind the tennis courts on the school grounds when they noticed something unusual. A man emerged from behind the bushes, took a breath, and walked away in the opposite direction. Although the children found this odd, they didn't pay much attention and continued walking. A few meters ahead, they stumbled upon a horrifying sight. A young woman lying unresponsive on the ground, who they thought might be dead. The children rushed back home to tell their parents, and one of the children's parents returned to the scene with them. Meanwhile, the other child's father decided to follow the suspicious man they had seen earlier. The child remembered seeing a car that resembled a Chevrolet Nova leaving the area, and since he lived near the school, his father decided to try to locate that car. After a while, he spotted a similar car, but unfortunately, he quickly lost sight of it and was unable to find it again. At the same time, the parents of the other child rushed to the school, where they discovered the young woman lying on the ground, likely dead. They promptly entered the school building and contacted the police. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed the young woman's death. They also quickly identified her as Sarah. The police deduced that the victim had been strangled based on the marks on her neck. Some of her personal belongings, including her jacket, underwear, and socks, were found nearby. However, her purse and car keys were discovered in the school parking lot, leading investigators to suspect that the assailant might have attacked her near her vehicle and then dragged her behind the trees. The body was sent to forensic experts for examination, and the police initiated their search for evidence. As a first step, they interviewed everyone who was in the school premises and its surrounding area. The two boys who discovered Sarah provided a rough description of the man who emerged from behind the bushes near her body. They described him as a tall, approximately 20-year-old man with shoulder-length, reddish hair, wearing a dark coat and black trousers. Soon, the police located another witness, and this is where the story takes a surprising turn. A man out for a run observed a strange scene in the same wooded area. He saw a girl lying next to the bushes, with a man hovering over her. The girl was completely still, and the witness initially thought the couple was engaging in intimate behavior in that spot. However, when he ran back through the area in the opposite direction a few minutes later, both the man and the girl were still there, in the same positions. At no point did he suspect that a serious crime was being committed. The witness, a recent immigrant to the United States from a different cultural background, was uncertain about typical behavior in the country. Despite this, he was able to provide the police with a rough description of the attacker, which matched the accounts given by the children who found Sarah's body. The police interviewed dozens of people who had been near the school, but no other useful information came to light. The medical examiners who performed the autopsy on Sarah's body determined that the cause of death was strangulation. It appeared that the attacker had used his own socks to strangle her. A severe head wound was also found, and experts believed that Sarah had lost consciousness due to this blow, which correlated with the runner's account of seeing her lying motionless on the ground. Forensic experts analyzed Sarah's clothing and discovered traces of male DNA on nearly all her garments. However, at that time, in 1991, there was no DNA database to match these samples against, so investigators had to rely on direct comparisons with DNA samples from specific suspects. Another significant finding was that although forensic experts found male DNA on Sarah's clothing, the forensic doctor reported no signs of sexual assault on her body. Based on this information, investigators pieced together their own theory of what happened. Since Sarah had arrived at the school almost an hour early, and she was alone in the parking lot, it's likely that her attacker saw her, waited for her to leave the car, struck her on the head with an object, causing her to lose consciousness. The attacker then dragged her body behind some trees, where it was later found. The assailant removed some of her clothing, engaged in inappropriate acts, and eventually strangled her using her own socks. When the children who found Sarah's body reported the car they thought the attacker had fled in, detectives started searching for a Chevrolet Nova. They soon found one, but the driver proved to have an alibi. He had just delivered donuts that morning, and his DNA didn't match the DNA on Sarah's clothes. It seemed the kids had simply seen the car driving by and mistakenly assumed the killer was inside. In fact, none of them could recall for certain whether they had seen a man get into a car from the bushes. In the days that followed, police continued to search for witnesses and new leads, but made no significant progress. Despite the horror of the event, classes resumed on Monday. The fact that the murder had occurred just a short distance from their school, and the killer remained at large with no known identity, added to the unease. Afraid to walk alone, the girls were escorted to their cars or buses by the boys from the sports teams, ensuring they weren't left alone on the street. Approximately 70 potential witnesses were present at the school and its surroundings on the morning of the incident. Investigators interviewed each of them, but unfortunately, no new information came to light. Based on the accounts of the two children and the runner, a composite sketch of the attacker was created and circulated to local newspapers and television stations. The case received widespread media attention, and over the next few weeks, the police received hundreds of testimony. Each tip was thoroughly investigated, but in every instance, it led to a dead end. One promising lead involved a man who matched the suspect's description and had a criminal record. However, his DNA did not match the sample found on the victim's clothing, and the lead was eventually ruled out. The case remained stagnant for months, with the police dealing with a staggering 4,000 tips, but lacking the resources to effectively follow up on each one. As new cases emerged monthly, the investigators' attention was increasingly divided, further hindering progress on the case. When Sarah's family learned that the police were struggling to manage the influx of tips, they stepped in to help in any way they could. One family member worked for a tech company and successfully lobbied the company's management to lend the police department a powerful computer worth $150,000 in the 1990s. This generous donation allowed the police to centralize and process the leads more efficiently, categorizing them for easy review. Despite their best efforts, however, every lead ultimately led to a dead end, and the case remained stagnant for years to come. 2 years later, Sarah's classmates prepared to graduate, and as a tribute to their friend, they raised a substantial amount of money to create a memorial in her honor. The memorial took the form of a bench featuring a metal casting of Sarah's belongings alongside a poignant photo of her dog reaching for her purse. Although the case was periodically reopened and re-examined in the years that followed, the outcome remained the same. The perpetrator remained at large. During this time, the police conducted thousands of interviews and collected DNA samples from nearly 300 potential suspects. But all these efforts ultimately proved fruitless. In 2011, 20 years after the murder, a detective decided to utilize modern technology to aid in the investigation. He contacted a genetic genealogy company, inquiring if they could help locate relatives of the individual who left DNA on the victim's body. The experts accepted the challenge, but unfortunately, they were unsuccessful. Two main factors contributed to their failure. Firstly, genetic genealogy was still in its early stages, and the experts' capabilities were limited. For instance, they couldn't simultaneously search for both male and female relatives from the same DNA sample. If the DNA was from a male, they could only search for male familial connections, and vice versa. Secondly, legal obstacles hindered their progress, as various laws prohibited the use of genetic data samples to search for relatives of suspects. The researchers the detective approached had spent years tracing the genetic family tree of the British passengers who arrived in the United States on the Mayflower in 1620. By analyzing the DNA of Sarah's attacker, they found a link to one of the ship's passengers, Robert Fuller. However, tracking the attacker's lineage proved extremely difficult, especially considering the passage of time. Although the Mayflower had only around 100 passengers, their descendants now number over 25 million. Despite the initial setback, this was the first time genetic genealogy had been used to solve a crime. The detective gathered available information and identified several local residents with the surname Fuller. He showed them pictures of the men, but none were recognized by the witnesses, including a runner and two men who had stumbled upon the body as children. Next, the detective collected DNA samples from all the local Fullers and sent them to the lab. Although none of the samples matched the attacker's DNA, one surprising discovery emerged. One of the men was a distant descendant of Robert Fuller from the Mayflower. However, he was not the killer and had no knowledge of any distant relatives living nearby. The detective retired in 2017, and a new team of investigators took over the case. In 2011, a company had taken over the study of the DNA sample from the assailant, and the new team reached out to them. Given the significant advancements, in genetic material study capabilities, the experts agreed to try to trace the assailant's lineage. Over the next 2 years, they painstakingly worked through public databases to find even the most distant relatives of the assailant, then manually traced their family connections to individuals who lived during the time of Sarah's death. After eliminating several thousand individuals, they finally got a break in September 2019. They identified 2 new potential suspects, brothers Edward and Patrick Nicholas, who were descendants of Robert Fuller. The experts concluded that it was highly probable that a DNA sample found on Sarah's clothing belonged to one of the brothers at the time of the murder. The older brother, Edward, was a career criminal with a long history of violent offenses, and his DNA profile was already in the FBI database, ruling him out as a suspect in Sarah's murder. The younger brother, Patrick Nicholas, had also been arrested multiple times for violent crimes, but his DNA sample was not in the database because it was collected before the DNA profiles of offenders were added. The detectives put 55-year-old Patrick under surveillance right away. 2 days later, they got their chance. Patrick went to the laundromat, and while waiting for his clothes to wash, he stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. When he was done, he carelessly threw the butt on the ground. One of the officers quickly picked it up and put it in an evidence bag, then returned to his car. Patrick repeated this process, stepping outside to smoke again, and this time a cloth handkerchief accidentally fell out of his pocket. The police thought it wise to take this second piece of evidence, just in case they couldn't get a DNA sample from the cigarette butt. As it turned out, the forensic experts had no problem obtaining samples from both items. The next day, they had the long-awaited news for the detective. Patrick's DNA matched the traces found on Sarah's clothing back in 1991 perfectly. The judge immediately issued a warrant for Patrick's arrest, and the police took him into custody. It took investigators 5 days to identify the suspect and formally charge him with murder. Once his biography was made public, an obvious question arose. Why had a man with such a criminal history not been considered a suspect for 28 years? Patrick Nicholas, at 19, had attempted to assault a young woman who managed to escape by jumping into a river and swimming to safety. He was later arrested and spent 4 years in prison. In 1994, he was arrested again for trying to assault a minor, but his DNA was not recorded in any database because the charge was not serious enough. Over the next 3 decades, his name never surfaced during investigations, and he didn't appear in over 4,000 leads. It was eventually revealed that genetic genealogy experts couldn't trace him back to Robert Fuller because Patrick was adopted and grew up with a different surname. One of the men who discovered Sarah's body when they were children in 1991 immediately asserted that Patrick was undoubtedly the same killer. He admitted that the incident had deeply affected him, as he was only 12 years old when the body was discovered, and the perpetrator had seen his face for many years. The witness lived in constant fear that the killer would come after him, and only after Patrick's arrest did he finally feel safe. Patrick's trial did not start until 2023. Despite claiming innocence, the main piece of evidence, his DNA on the victim's clothing, was a major obstacle. His lawyer attempted to argue that the presence of Patrick's DNA did not necessarily mean he was guilty, but this claim was dismissed. The lawyer also questioned the accuracy of the DNA analysis, but experts deemed this entirely unreliable. In the end, Patrick was found guilty of first-degree murder without premeditation on May 25th. He received a prison sentence of 45 years and 8 months, effectively ensuring he would never be released. At the sentencing, Patrick remained emotionless, in contrast to Sarah's family, who thanked the judge, trial participants, and investigators for bringing the killer to justice after 28 years of evasion. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Neil Entwistle. In the peaceful town of Hopkinton, Massachusetts, a family's story unfolded in a sad and surprising way, sharing a compelling tale that interested the entire nation. This is the story of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza, a story of love, lies, and a tragedy that destroyed the belief in a flawless life. Neil and Rachel are a happy couple with a new baby. Neil is from Britain and works in IT, while Rachel is an American mother who takes good care of their daughter. Despite seeming to have it all, they were actually facing some hidden tensions that led to a tragic outcome. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England, to Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle. He grew up in a humble household with his younger brother Russell. His father used to work as a miner before becoming a labor advisor, while his mother worked as a cook in a school cafeteria. After finishing high school, Neil went to the University of York to study electronic engineering and business management. While at university, he met Rachel Souza, an American student studying abroad. Rachel, originally from Kingston, Massachusetts, had attended Silver Lake Region High School before moving to Holy Cross College in Worcester. She spent a year at York University, where she met Entwistle while both were on the rowing team. Neil was described as reserved and not very social, but his peers noticed his quiet nature. On the other hand, Rachel was seen as lively and outgoing, and she was popular in the community. Her American background added a special charm to her personality, making her a positive presence on the rowing team. As their relationship deepened, Neil Entwistle and Rachel Souza found themselves increasingly drawn to each other, spending more time together. Benjamin Pryor, a close friend from their college days, later provided testimony about their relationship, describing their interactions as marked by enjoyment and a strong sense of ease, leading observers to perceive them as a genuinely affectionate couple. While Neil worked at a defense technology and security company in Malvern, Worcestershire, Rachel focused on her career in education. She finished her studies in 2002 and started teaching English, drama, and theatre studies at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Reading, showing her dedication to guiding young minds through the arts. Neil jokingly described his job as making bombs and other items. He happily announced his engagement to Rachel, whom he called the most amazing woman. They met through rowing and were deeply connected. Neil was satisfied with his upcoming marriage, despite not being completely happy about living south of the Birmingham border. In August 2003, the couple got married in Plymouth, UK, and Massachusetts, USA. After their US wedding, they had a reception in the UK in November of the same year. Neil shared the start of their married life in Worcester on a family website he made, sharing memories from their trip to the Mediterranean in Christmas 2004. In April 2005, Neil and Rachel welcomed their daughter, Lillian Rose, into the world, marking a significant turning point in their lives. This new addition to their family prompted them to decide to relocate to the United States. They initially resided in Carver, Massachusetts, with Rachel's mother, Priscilla Mataran's stepfather Joseph, until January 12, 2006, when they secured a home of their own in Hopkinton. Their new residence, nestled on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, offered a tranquil setting just a short distance from the nearest major city. The 5-bedroom colonial-style rental property came with a monthly rent of $1,500, reflecting the upscale nature of their accommodation. Neil struggled to find a job as a computer programmer and IT specialist, which led to financial difficulties and debt. To ease the situation, he started selling PC parts on eBay. However, his business faced issues with undelivered orders and drew attention from eBay's fraud investigator. It was discovered that Neil used multiple accounts with different names. During this period, Neil was also running a website called millionmaker.co.uk, promoting a get-rich-quick scheme for the adult entertainment industry. The site claimed to guarantee a monthly profit of $6,000 within 6 months, but was later shut down. Simultaneously, Neil was actively seeking sexual partners through various online platforms. He frequented websites in pursuit of such relationships. Neil registered on Adult Friend Finder and reached out to multiple women via email, expressing his interest in finding sexual partners. During the investigation, authorities discovered incriminating evidence on Neil's laptop, including content from his online profile, indicating his interest in meeting American women of various ages. His profile mentioned a desire to confirm rumors suggesting American women's superiority in bed compared to those from overseas. He expressed a mutual desire for a particular type of relationship, implying a straightforward approach to meeting like-minded individuals. In the weeks leading up to the tragic murders of Rachel and their daughter Lillian, Neil conducted a series of disturbing online searches, including inquiries about how to kill with a knife, interspersed with more mundane searches related to employment, travel, and get-rich-quick schemes. Additionally, during this period, Neil visited his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo, who was a member of the Old Colony Sportsman's Club in Carver, where Neil had previously stored a .22 caliber revolver and received shooting lessons from Joe. Neil devised a plan to steal a gun from Joe's collection. At their home in Carver, Massachusetts, Neil made a trip to his in-laws' residence, retrieved the weapon from a concealed location in the house, and drove back to Hopkinton with the gun in his possession. Upon returning home, he discreetly concealed the firearm, biding his time for the opportune moment to carry out the tragic acts of violence against his family before taking his own life. On Friday, January 20th, 2006, Neil entered the family's master bedroom, where they had been living for only 10 days. His wife Rachel and their infant daughter Lillian were sleeping in their new 4-poster bed. He crept inside and shot 27-year-old Rachel in the head, then proceeded to shoot 9-month-old Lillian, who was lying beside her mother. The bullet passed through Lillian's tiny body and pierced Rachel's left breast. Later that same day, while his in-laws were still at work, he returned to Carver to return the weapon without cleaning it. He later claimed that he had gone shopping at Staples that Friday, found his family dead upon returning home, and then went to Carver to get a pistol to commit suicide. However, he didn't contact emergency services, revealing a pattern of lies to cover his tracks. Upon leaving Carver, Neil drove to Logan Airport in Boston on the evening of January 20th, 2006. He made 2 ATM withdrawals totaling $800, but 3 additional withdrawal attempts for $420 were declined. The following day, Saturday, January 21st, 2006, Neil purchased a one-way ticket to London, carrying no luggage. Around 5 p.m., he boarded a British Airways flight that departed Boston at 8:15 p.m. On that Saturday evening, Neil had invited several neighbors for dinner. Shortly after 7 p.m., Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen arrived at the home, but found it locked with the lights on inside. Concerned, they tried calling Rachel's mother, who had also planned to visit that day for lunch with her daughter, but had been unable to reach her. Alarmed, they decided to call 911 around 8:30. Police officers arrived at Neil's home to search for any signs of the missing family. Sergeant Michael Sutton described the scene, noting he could see into the bedroom, where there was a large bed in the center of the room that was unmade, with all the bedding appearing to be piled up. Other than the disheveled bed, nothing seemed out of place. After their search, the police locked up the house, left, and continued their patrol. Despite the police search, the Gatley sisters remained deeply concerned. They were so distressed that they decided to spend the night outside, in their car, waiting for the family's return, despite the cold. They made 3 trips to the gas station bathroom to endure the night while awaiting any news. On the following Sunday morning, the sisters managed to enter the house using the garage door code they obtained from a neighbor the previous night. Inside, they discovered dishes and leftovers in the kitchen, suggesting the family had recently finished a meal. The bathtub still held water, indicating that the couple had bathed their infant daughter. They proceeded to the main bedroom and then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally checked the living room, before Rachel's mother and stepfather arrived. After assessing the situation together, they collectively decided it was time to report the family as missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. Sergeant Sutton returned to the Neal residence for a second search. As he entered the basement, he detected a new, unpleasant smell that was not present the day before. Following the odor through the house, he eventually reached the primary bedroom, where he found Rachel and Lillian deceased in the unmade four-poster bed, covered with clothes. Rachel's arms were stretched over her infant's chest, with her feet curled beside her, and both were dressed in pajamas. The autopsy results revealed that Rachel died from a gunshot wound to the head, while Lillian had been shot in the torso. Additionally, Rachel's DNA was found on the gun barrel, while Neal's was discovered on the gun grip. Neal Entwistle, who was 27 years old at the time, was considered only a missing person during this period. Around 36 hours after returning to England, Neal visited his parents, Cliff and Ion. He had been driving around and had spent the previous night at a hotel. During this visit, he disclosed to them that he had discovered the bodies of his wife and daughter. On Monday, January 23, 2006, Neal engaged in a phone conversation with the Hopkinton police. This 2-hour phone call between Neal and Massachusetts State Trooper Robert Manning was recorded and subsequently played in its entirety during the court proceedings. Neal stated that upon discovering the bodies, he was overcome with fear and rushed to be with his family. He recounted to the police, "I covered them with the sheets, and all I could think about were the knives we had downstairs. I took out the large one and held it against myself. I was fearful of the pain it would cause. I just couldn't go through with it. I don't understand why I didn't call for emergency assistance." Failing to muster the resolve to harm himself with a knife, Neal informed the authorities that he drove the family vehicle to his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo's residence, to retrieve a .22 LR caliber revolver. He claimed to have found the house locked, leading him to choose to return to England to be with his parents on January 26, 2006. US law enforcement officials traveled to the UK to interview Neal the following day, January 27th. After consulting with a lawyer at the workshop residence, he chose not to engage with the American detectives at the US Embassy in London, despite his voluntary presence there. Rachel and her daughter Lillian were laid to rest in Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza. They were interred in a single casket, despite around 500 individuals attending the funeral to bid their final farewells. Neal was notably absent from the funeral, and his name was omitted from the proceedings and not inscribed on their shared headstone during the burial ceremony. Neal sent a single orange rose and a white lily, with a note attached to the ribbon that read, "My orange rose and my lily for always," signed off with Zokoko. Upon his return to the UK, Neal appeared to be resuming a routine life in February 2006, while media attention remained outside his parents' residence in Workshop. He went to Notting Hill for a dinner gathering with his former crew team from York University, followed by a movie outing about a week after the funeral service for Rachel and Lillian on February 8, 2006. The Middlesex County District Attorney's Office issued an arrest warrant for Neal the following day, on February 9, 2006. Neal was apprehended by the Extradition Unit of London's Metropolitan Police Service at Royal Oak Station as he was about to board a train. Upon learning of the impending arrest, among his possessions was a notebook detailing his intention to sell his account to the highest bidder. In the notebook, he expressed affection for his orange rose and lily, referring to his wife as his dearest and closest friend on another page. Additionally, he had drafted 2 letters to the editor seeking to share his perspective on the events. Neal aimed to explain his perspective and communicated with a close friend and confidant to convey his intentions. In one of the letters, he inquired about the potential monetary value associated with exclusive rights for his full account. Ultimately, Neal decided not to challenge the extradition order and he was transported back to the United States on February 15th. He appeared in Framingham District Court, where he was remanded without bail at Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Following this, on March 28, 2006, Neil was formally charged with 2 counts of murder, as well as illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. Despite the charges, he entered a plea of not guilty in December 2006, nearly a year after the tragic incident. Authorities at Middlesex County Jail, where Neil was detained, discovered letters he had written to his parents and legal team. These letters indicated that Neil was in a state of depression and suggested he might be contemplating suicide. Consequently, he was transferred to Bridgewater Hospital for psychiatric assessment before being returned to Middlesex County. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordless attributed Neil's behavior to Asperger syndrome, a view that was supported by Dr. David Holmes. After several delays, the process of selecting jurors for the trial at Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. Concerns were raised regarding the high-profile nature of the case and whether Neil would be able to receive a fair trial. The trial for the double murder officially commenced on June 2, 2008, in Woburn, Massachusetts, with Elliot Weinstein leading Neil's legal team. During the trial, Weinstein unsuccessfully attempted to challenge the prosecution's proposal to introduce DNA evidence. Similarly, efforts to suppress other evidence discovered in the family home due to the absence of a warrant were also futile. Neil chose not to present any witnesses or testify in his defense throughout the trial. Observers noted his lack of visible emotion during the proceedings. On June 25, 2008, Neil Entwistle was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Upon leaving the courtroom, Neil was overheard reassuring his loved ones in the gallery, saying, "I'll be all right." Initially, Neil was held at Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. In August 2008, he fell victim to a deceptive ploy where he shaved his head in an attempt to seek protection from a white supremacist prison gang. However, instead of receiving protection, the gang threatened his life, stating, "It's a nice gesture on your part, but we're going to kill you." Following this incident, Neil was placed in protective custody, and subsequently in December, he was transferred to Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison located in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. The Department of Correction confirmed that the transfer was made for Neil's safety due to credible threats against his life. The tragic deaths of Rachel and her infant daughter left a profound emptiness in the hearts of those who knew and loved them. Their passing serves as a stark reminder of the vibrant lives that were abruptly cut short in the aftermath of this heartbreaking loss. The community came together, providing unwavering support and comfort to the grieving families. Their unity and strength during such adversity demonstrate the remarkable resilience and compassion that resides within humanity. The narrative of Neil Entwistle and Rachel Sousa stands as a poignant reflection of the unseen challenges that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly perfect existences. May the legacy of Rachel and her daughter prompt us to remain vigilant, extend a helping hand to those in distress, and cherish every moment spent with our dear ones. Their story serves as a somber yet powerful call to prioritize empathy, support, and appreciation in our interactions with others. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Ricky Neve. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day of his tragic death matched with James Watson, who was a teenager at the time and had managed to evade justice for so long. Despite his mother's harsh way of raising her children, she seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her actions, driving her to seek justice for her son's murder. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what truly happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised, and what events occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? Ricky Lee Harvey, also known as Ricky Neve, was born on March 4, 1988, in the city of Peterborough, located in the county of Cambridgeshire, in England, to Trevor Harvey and Ruth Ann Gregg. Ruth's life had been marked by turmoil from an early age, with her being placed in foster care at the mere age of 2. Her younger brother, who was born blind at the tender age of 1, had already been placed in foster care. She endured a challenging journey through various foster homes before returning to her parents' care, forever changed by the abuse and insults she suffered while she was under foster care. Her empathy and affection dwindled with time, which was an observation made and reported by her mother to the authorities, a struggle that the mother had been dealing with too for quite some time. Tragedy struck again when Ruth's parents took their own lives as a suicide pact later on, leaving her to face the world alone once again. At 16, she met Trevor Harvey, settled in Cambridgeshire, and gave birth to their first child, Rebecca Maria Harvey, in 1986. They had their second child, Ricky, 2 years later. Their happiness was short-lived, as Trevor and Ruth separated when Ricky was only 3, but Ruth met Dean Neve not long after. They married and welcomed their first daughter into the world and named her Rochelle Neve. The family later moved into the Welland estate in Peterborough in 1992. Ruth decided to change Ricky's surname to match her new husband's, and he was now known as Ricky Neve. Sometime later, they welcomed another daughter and named her Sheridan Neve. They lived in Red Mile Walk, which was a part of the Welland estate that was well known for its association with crime and drug use. Unfortunately, the family's new home was riddled with challenges, as Dean Neve was a notorious drug dealer, and Ruth had succumbed to addiction. She would even spend a lot on drugs, to a point of neglecting her children's basic needs. Ricky and his sisters often wandered the estate without proper care, food, or clothing, drawing concern from neighbors who bravely reported the situation to social services. Ricky was the one who took care of his siblings when they were starved, as he would nick something from the shops and bring it to feed his siblings. He loved being clean, so he also made sure they were clean by running a bath for them. Dean was rarely at home, and Ruth often blamed Ricky for this, claiming that he was always away since he hated his stepson. This made her start hating Ricky, as she would write to Dean during his prison stints how she had hurt him by punching him and burning him with matches, and how she even wanted to kill him. She hated him more as she claimed that he would always laugh at her. The neighbors, often seeing the children outside, had no idea what really happened in that house. Ruth tormented and degraded the innocent children, frequently burning them with cigarettes and hurling insults at them. At one point, she even wrote "idiot" on their foreheads and forbade them from removing it. She would force them to stand for long periods of time while she smacked them on the head. She sent them to buy her drugs even after starving them. An allegation surfaced that she had been seen dangling Ricky by his ankles over a bridge. On one occasion, she forced Ricky to swallow liquid soap, and as he struggled to breathe, he managed to say, "I love you, Mommy." She would strangle the daughters to unconsciousness and even beat them with a hairbrush to the point of breaking it. They were even locked naked in rooms full of urine. The children tried to get the attention of their neighbors, which was often in vain, as their cries were not heard by them. Ricky was placed on the at-risk register after Ruth warned the child services repeatedly that she would kill him. He was taken into short-term care to give the mother some time. However, his files were mismanaged. Ruth, despite the clear evidence of the burns, cuts, and bruises on the children, would get away with it through her false explanations and excuses of accidents, and even blaming Ricky for being clumsy on his part. After 28 years, DNA from the clothes worn by 6-year-old Ricky Neve on the day he died tragically matched that of James Watson. the teenage killer who had managed to evade justice for a long time. Despite her cruelty in raising her children, Ricky's mother seemed burdened with remorse and guilt for her unforgiving actions, which drove her to seek her son's killer. Ricky's sisters were also determined to unravel the puzzling mystery and bring the killer to justice. But what really happened in the household where Ricky and his sisters were raised? And what occurred on the day of Ricky's murder, allowing the perpetrator to escape the law's grasp for so long? On January of 1995, Ruth was suspected of murdering her own son during that very month. She faced charges of cruelty and neglect under the Children's Act and appeared at Peterborough Magistrates' Court, accused of cruelty towards Ricky and one of her other children. In May of 1995, Ruth was charged with the murder of her son and offenses of cruelty to him and two of his sisters. Her trial began the following year, in October 1996, at the Northampton Crown Court. Prosecutors told the jury that Ricky and his siblings were treated with cruelty and neglect, backed by witness statements. The prosecution concluded that Ricky was killed in a sacrifice by his mother, based on her numerous death threats to him. Ruth admitted to charges of neglect and cruelty, but denied any involvement in her son's murder. The case hinged on the testimony of a policeman who stated that he had not found the child's body during his search of the woods, where Ricky was eventually discovered on the night of his disappearance. The prosecution claimed the officer might have missed it in the dark. The jurors acquitted Ruth, convinced that she couldn't have moved Ricky's body since the police were with her at the said time. However, she was sentenced to 7 years in jail for the cruelty towards Ricky and his sisters, charges to which she had already confessed. Ruth was released in 2000, but the killer remained a mystery. In 2008, she met Gary Rogers, who married her. By then, Ricky's murder had become a cold case, and the police had given up. Rogers promised Ruth that he would give her all the support she needed to reopen the case and try to find the killer. In 2013, with the help of Cambridgeshire Times editor John Elworthy, they worked tirelessly to campaign for the reopening of the case, and eventually succeeded. Rogers secured the original files from Ruth's former solicitor, a collection of 13 boxes with 8 to 12 ring binders filled with papers, and diligently read through each one. They met Paul Fulwood, the head of the local major crime unit at the time, who listened to the evidence they had and saw the reviews that the police had done beforehand. He thought the original hypothesis of Ruth being the killer was fanciful at best, and the more he looked at it, the more he became convinced that they needed to investigate further. Mr. Fulwood organized a cold case investigation with a new team made up of staff not involved in the original investigation. With fresh perspective, determination, and what they deemed as a stroke of luck, new evidence that would help solve the crime was found in the forensic archives. The crucial evidence was a piece of sellotape used to collect fibers from Ricky's clothes. Advancements in DNA technology in recent years have played a crucial role in solving cold cases, bringing justice for victims whose killers were thought to have gotten away, and providing closure to family and friends. An unidentified DNA was found on Ricky's clothes, and forensic tests matched it to none other than James Watson. At the time of Ricky's death, Watson was only 13 and lived at Woodgate's Children's Home in Cambridgeshire, 20 miles away from Peterborough. He had moved there from foster care in March of 1994. On November 25, 1994, 3 days before Ricky's murder, Watson had asked his mother about a young child found dead in the woods. His mother, having no clue what he was talking about, brushed off the conversation, assuring him that nobody had heard of such a thing happening. Little did she know that he would be the one behind such an atrocity just 3 days later. Watson was questioned by the police after several witnesses claimed to have seen them together on that fateful day, but he vehemently denied it, stating he was nowhere near Ricky and that he only caught a glimpse of him. The mother also said nothing about the conversation they had, just some days prior about the made-up scenario of the young child in the woods that would materialize in less than a week with an almost similar description to what had actually happened. The police did not further challenge him, perhaps due to ignorance or their preference for the idea of Ruth being the killer and not some disturbed teenager. They probably didn't know he was disturbed until later. Watson was, of course, searched for and arrested in April 2016 in connection with Ricky's murder. By then, he was already a serial offender with a criminal record that included stealing cars and an arson attack at a British transport police station back in 2008. Questioned by the new investigation team about his DNA ending up on Ricky's clothes, Watson changed the story he had initially given to the police. He now said that he might have lifted Ricky to help him see over a fence. This statement started getting him into further trouble. The police tested his claim and found footage from 1994 showing the estate being redeveloped. They discovered that the fence was not built when Ricky Neve was still there, as it was constructed after he was already murdered. The investigators were therefore able to prove that Watson was not only a fantasist, but also a huge liar. However, this was still not enough to secure his conviction, so they started to pull other pieces of evidence together. It was not long until evidence was found that he had inappropriately touched a 5-year-old child when he was around 11 or 12, and his ex-girlfriend had also complained about him strangling her during sex. 2 teachers also revealed how he had become obsessed with Ricky's murder case, showing an unnatural level of interest in it, and even photocopying the front page of the Peterborough Evening Telegraph, which covered the case. More disturbing behavior had also been noted at the children's home where he lived, including him pleasing himself over pictures of young boys in underwear. He also kept a dead pheasant in his room, and it was claimed that he had on one occasion killed a bird and spread its wings in a sinister reconstruction of Ricky's murder. After being released on police bail, he left the UK 3 months later in a motorhome with another bail hostel resident. He travelled to Rotterdam, then France, and crossed the Pyrenees into Portugal. From France, he had reached out to his sister, Claire Perner, admitting that he was in serious trouble and that he had made a massive mistake. The next time he called, he reiterated that he was in deeper trouble and urgently needed to return to the UK. He had shamelessly posted pictures of himself on social media, enjoying the beaches, bragging about how he got out of the country. Seeing the pictures of Watson abroad, which were extensively covered in the media, angered Ricky's family. They knew that since he had escaped the country even after his passport had been taken, he was definitely guilty of the act. Watson was eventually rearrested near the British Embassy in Lisbon and extradited back to Britain. He was found guilty of murder by a majority of the Old Bailey jury. Previously, the court heard how Watson's sexual interest in younger boys was known to police, who had interviewed him over an allegation that he molested a 5-year-old back in 1993. The disturbing behavior was noted at Watson's children's home, and the prosecution claimed it was no coincidence that 3 days before the murder, Watson was the source of a bogus radio report about a 2-year-old boy being strangled. Immediately after Ricky's murder in identical circumstances, Watson obsessed over newspaper coverage of the killing, copying front-page stories at school. The jurors heard that key evidence in the case against Watson included Ricky's last meal of Weetabix, taken in the morning, which fixed his time of death at around noon when he was seen playing with Watson. It meant that Ricky was killed shortly after heading to the woods with Watson, where he used to play. Watson's legal team had accused Ricky's mother, but she denied any involvement. Ricky's muddy Clark shoes also indicated his walk into the woods was a one-way trip, and not a case of being murdered by the mother and the body being dragged into the forest, therefore ruling out that accusation. After a trial at London's Old Bailey that took place from January 18th to April 21st, 2022, James Watson, at the age of 41, was found guilty of Ricky Neve's murder. On June 24, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years by Mrs. Justice McGowan. The judge considered Watson's age at the time of Ricky's death as a significant factor in determining the sentence. In June 2023, Watson was granted permission to appeal his conviction. His lawyer argued before the Court of Appeal that Watson was not able to get a fair trial because too much of the evidence from which the killer's DNA could have been recovered was lost or destroyed in the intervening years. This case could have been solved much earlier if the official police records of 6 reported sexual assaults on children in the Welland estate in the 3-year period before Ricky's murder had been thoroughly investigated. If the reports had been followed up, the allegation on his record of touching a 5-year-old could have been a crucial lead to the police in finding the perpetrator. These failures in the investigation add to the list of the many shortcomings in this case. The verdict was a triumph for Ricky's sisters, who had never thought they would see justice for their beloved brother. With the killer finally caught, the family found a sense of closure, allowing them to move forward with their lives while cherishing the memory of the little boy Ricky was back in 1994. Ricky Neve will forever be remembered as a loving and caring brother and a brave and kind-hearted boy. Despite facing challenges at a young age, he showed remarkable courage and love and always protected his sisters. He deserved a life brimming with joy, but tragically, he endured cruelty, neglect, and the ultimate horror of murder. If he had been given the love and affection he deserved, this heart-wrenching tragedy might never have occurred in the first place. Jamie Hahn was born on October 25, 1983. Growing up in Orangeburg, South Carolina, she lived with her 2 brothers and sister, Brett, Justin, and Ashley. Despite their parents' divorce and remarriage, Jamie remained a cheerful child. She attended a small yet renowned private prep school celebrated for its educational excellence. In junior high, Jamie visited the University of North Carolina with her classmates. She instantly fell in love with the campus and aspired to attend. Even as a student, she aimed to impact others' lives by joining the board of the Center of Hope to support troubled teens. Later on, Jamie engaged in various political campaigns. One notable campaign was Senator John Edwards' 2008 presidential run, a competitor to Obama. During this campaign, Jamie emerged as a prominent figure in North Carolina's Democratic Party. During one campaign, she met Nation and formed a deep professional relationship with him that later evolved from platonic to romantic. 4 months after their first romantic moment, they announced their engagement and married on April 18, 2009. Their intense love was anchored in a deep friendship. Jamie and Nation thrived in their respective careers. Jamie ran her own political fundraising consulting firm, while Nation was a well-known online strategist aiding politicians and nonprofits with their campaigns. Described by friends and acquaintances as exceptionally kind, tender, and generous, the couple was well regarded. They took their marriage vows seriously and actively participated in projects like the Coalition to Protect Young Families in North Carolina. Although they were childless at that time, Jamie and Nation planned on starting a family soon. They both enjoyed vibrant social lives. Jamie was known among her friends and family as a compassionate individual who had the ability to spread happiness wherever she went. Her talent and enthusiasm for politics led many to foresee a promising future for her. However, unexpectedly, their seemingly perfect world suddenly fell apart on April 22, 2013. Around 5:20 p.m., Jamie frantically ran from her house and sprinted a few dozen meters before collapsing unconscious in a neighbor's yard. Her body was drenched in blood. Onlookers on the street were shocked by the scene and shouted for someone to call 911. A neighbor, who saw the turmoil unfolding in his yard, immediately phoned emergency services. Through Jameen's disoriented words, he understood that someone named John, who seemed to still be inside her house, had assaulted her with a knife. He quickly applied a towel to the numerous wounds on her abdomen and urgently summoned an ambulance and the police. Arriving patrol officers traced the blood from the neighbor's yard back to the Hahn residence. Encircling the house, they commanded the individual inside to exit with hands raised. Moments later, a disheveled bald man emerged on the porch. The officers noted he bore wrist injuries and a stab wound in his abdomen. Due to his injuries, this unidentified man was transported to the hospital in an ambulance, escorted by a police officer. En route to the hospital, the wounded man grew distressed and tearful, expressing regret that this hadn't occurred sooner, and repeatedly murmuring a desire to die. Following his medical treatment, the police endeavored to ascertain his identity, reasons for being in the Hahn residence, and circumstances leading to this tragic event. They soon discovered he was 31-year-old Jonathan Wayne Brill, a close friend of Nation and a guest in their home. Jameen also knew John well. She had employed him as an accountant in her political consulting firm after he relocated to North Carolina. The couple had generously offered him accommodation in their home until he could find his own place. Nation and John hailed from the same hometown and first crossed paths in 2000 during a church trip. Despite a 4-year age gap, they quickly struck up a friendship. As it often happens with childhood friends, they drifted apart when one went off to college, but rekindled their bond post-graduation. They became virtually inseparable. Jonathan even had the honor of being the best man at Nation and Jameen's wedding. In April 2009, the trio was akin to the Three Musketeers, following the ethos of one for all and all for one. They shared vacations, regular Monday dinners, and celebrated holidays together. To some neighbors, Jonathan seemed almost like an extension of the Hahn family, given how much time he spent at their home. This deep, seemingly unbreakable bond makes the violent incident that left all three with stab wounds in their own home all the more perplexing and tragic. Every Monday, Jamie and Nation would host their mutual friend Jonathan for dinner. On that particular day, Broyhill arrived earlier than usual with the intention of discussing recent campaign details with Jamie. The friends were deeply concerned about John's well-being, as he had confided in them about his diagnosis of pancreatic cancer, a notably aggressive and often terminal disease. The Hahns, in their caring nature, accompanied Jonathan to his medical appointments and were consistently present, offering every possible support in his arduous battle for life. There was an instance when Jamie, overwhelmed with emotion, asked Nation if they should consider having a child soon, so that their future offspring might have the chance to know Jonathan. Such was their affection and regard for their friend, they wished even their yet-to-be-born child could have the opportunity to bond with him. The recent diagnosis of cancer was a harsh blow, but it wasn't the first health challenge Brill had encountered. Over the years, John had experienced multiple hospitalizations. He had once revealed to Nation that he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis during a gallbladder operation. Consequently, the Hahns invited Jonathan to live with them temporarily, offering care and support until his health improved. On that fateful Monday, Jamie and Jonathan were already engaged in work-related discussions in the kitchen when Nation arrived home and headed upstairs to change. Nation was startled by Jamie's screams calling out his and then John's name. Assuming that Brill may have fallen ill given his medical condition, Nation hurried downstairs midway. He was met with Jameen's terror-stricken voice, crying out that someone was trying to stab her. Rushing into the kitchen, Nation was confronted with the horrifying sight of his wife on the floor, bleeding profusely. John stood over her, wielding a large kitchen knife. As Brill started advancing towards Nation, knife raised threateningly, Nation froze in disbelief. How could such a nightmare unfold in mere minutes? In a desperate act of self-defense, Nation grabbed the knife blade with one hand while striking John in the face with his other hand. Amidst this chaos, he frantically urged Jameen to run for safety. Attempting to subdue a man who until moments ago was his closest friend seemed almost unreal. Despite her grave injuries, Jameen miraculously managed to rise from the floor and flee through the side door of their home. Once she was out, Nation, overcoming shock and tumult, pushed Jonathan aside and hurried after his wife. Outside, Jameen desperately made her way to the nearest neighbor's house for help. Unfortunately, no one responded to her urgent knocking. Summoning her remaining strength, she attempted to reach the next house, but collapsed unconscious in their yard due to her overwhelming injuries. Alerted by the commotion and drawn by the screams, passers-by quickly came to her assistance, while a neighbor called for an ambulance and the police. Meanwhile, Nation, panicked, searched frantically for Jameen. Following the trail of blood led him to discover her in a neighbor's yard. She was conscious, but in agony, clutching her side. Kneeling beside her, he took her hand and tried comforting her with promises of recovery and future anniversaries and vacations by the sea, though tears streamed down his face. As he spoke, clutching Jameen's hand, Nation was overwhelmed by thoughts of a life without her and unable to fathom how their peaceful life had taken such a sudden turn. As they awaited help, a neighbor swiftly brought a towel to press against Jameen's bleeding abdomen. Unfortunately, the towel was quickly soaked with blood. Another compassionate neighbor elevated Jameen's legs onto a bag of leaves, trying to give some comfort. The ambulance was on its way, but to the onlookers, the wait felt endless. Even though it was only a few minutes, Jameen's breathing grew labored, a clear sign of her critical state. When the paramedics arrived, they promptly administered life-saving measures. Nation, having suffered severe cuts to his hand while wrestling with the knife, also desperately needed medical attention. Both he and Jameen were rushed to the hospital. During transport, Jameen lost consciousness and upon arrival was taken immediately for emergency surgery. Meanwhile, Nation, overwhelmed with worry for his wife and oblivious to his own pain, received stitches. He was in such shock that he repeatedly tried to enter the ICU, desperate for any updates about Jameen, but was denied access. Seated anxiously on a hospital bed, Nation was tormented by thoughts of Jameen's condition. Over a dozen stab wounds, a severed artery, and severe liver damage. His only solace during those excruciating moments was hoping and praying for her survival. By some miracle, Jameen did survive the surgery initially. But tragically, this hope was short-lived. She never regained consciousness. 2 days after this harrowing ordeal, Jameen succumbed to her injuries. The autopsy revealed a grim reality. She had sustained 24 stab wounds across various parts of her body, including her face, neck, back, hands, and forearms. However, the most lethal injuries were inflicted on her abdomen and chest, resulting in catastrophic damage to her lungs and liver. Meanwhile, Jonathan Brill had inflicted wounds upon himself and was hospitalized for 8 days to recover from his self-inflicted injuries. On Tuesday, April 30th, 2013, still needing medical attention with bandages on both wrists, Brill was transported on a stretcher to the magistrate's office in Wake County. The individual was formally charged with first-degree murder in the case Jameen Han and assault with a deadly weapon on Nation Han. Due to the severity of the charges, he was held without bail and at Central Prison in Raleigh. This facility was specifically chosen because it housed a hospital wing, ensuring that Bry Hill would continue to receive the necessary medical treatment while in custody for his crimes. The tragic and sudden loss of Jameen profoundly impacted many, leaving a lingering question. Why would someone she considered a best friend commit such a horrific act, robbing her of her future? In the wake of the tragedy, speculation swirled within the community about a substantial amount of money that had gone missing during the election campaign, managed by Jameen's team. Jonathan Brill, who had served as the accountant, officially ceased working for the company at the end of 2012. Despite this, he remained responsible for providing Jameen with financial details and assisting in the preparation of financial reports. It was suspected that Jameen might have discovered the missing funds, which totaled over $50,000, and confronted Jonathan about this discrepancy. This confrontation could have triggered his violent outburst. On April 22, 2013, Jameen had invited Jonathan over for their regular Monday dinner and intended to discuss the company's financial issues. The exact sequence of events during Nation's brief absence remains unclear. However, it is widely believed that Jameen might have challenged Jonathan regarding the missing funds during this time. As time passed, Nation's physical wounds began to heal, but emotional and psychological scars remained deep and unhealing. 6 months following this devastating event, Jameen's family and Nation, her grieving husband, scattered her ashes near Pulaski Memorial Baptist Church. This place was significant because Jameen had dedicated her time and efforts as a volunteer there. In a poignant twist of fate, just a week before the tragedy, the Hahns had requested the church's pastor to pray for Jonathan, who they believed was battling cancer. Did they know that soon it would be they who needed the prayers of their community in the wake of such an unimaginable loss? The Nation had to grapple with the truth that an individual he had known from childhood, whom he saw as his dearest friend, had completely shattered his life, and even more heartbreakingly, claimed the life of the woman he adored more than anything in the world. According to Nation, Jameen was his anchor, his backbone, and his soulmate. He couldn't fathom how the sun could continue to glow without her. The trial of Brill commenced on March 4, 2015. The district attorney informed the jury that Jonathan, serving as Jenny's financial manager, had written 39 checks to himself, misappropriating around $50,000, the identical sum missing from the account. To rationalize his deeds, Brill claimed various health issues, including brain impairment from multiple sclerosis, memory deficits, a gallbladder operation, and pancreatic cancer. Compassionate Jamie refrained from confronting John about such a sensitive matter during his challenging times. She tactfully sidestepped the issue, hoping Brill would identify and rectify the mistake. All seemed normal until she got a call from a debt collector. Then the district attorney unveiled a startling truth. The preceding year, the defendant's first hospitalization occurred when he was admitted following an episode at Hans's residence. Prior to that, Jonathan hadn't sought any medical treatment, as his health records confirmed. All along he had deceived Jamie and Nation about his health conditions. No gallbladder operation, no multiple sclerosis, and no cancer, but merely a manifest mental disorder and something dreadful. Within the search history, revealed that the man had been seeking information on pancreatic cancer and specialists in this particular field, evidently to lend credibility to his falsehoods. He also looked up cruises that could be taken without a passport. John had arranged a one-way journey to Las Vegas for April 23rd, but cancelled it on the 22nd, merely 2 hours before assaulting Jamie with a knife. Jonathan admitted to the authorities that he had indeed misappropriated the campaign funds and fabricated all his medical conditions. When the Hahns escorted him to medical appointments, waiting in the car as devoted, caring friends, he merely roamed the hospital halls. In recent times, Jonathan grappled with depression and suicidal inclinations. He confessed to being tormented by voices urging him to harm others. He purchased the knife for himself, supposedly planning to use it in Vegas to end his life. Yet, he believed Jameen would confront him about the financial irregularities. When she did, he began to inflict wounds on himself. Jamin attempted to intervene, but at that point, he was so deranged and furious that he started assaulting his friend impulsively. Jonathan recalled attacking Jamie, yet parts of this episode were wiped from his memory. His lawyer and Jonathan himself realized that fully dismissing the charges was unfeasible due to the overwhelming evidence of his guilt. Still, they aimed to argue for temporary insanity to lessen the sentence. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Nation Hahn was allowed to speak. With a voice filled with sorrow, he expressed, "We lock our doors at night to block out the world's evil, but it's chilling to think what occurs when evil holds the key." He addressed these words to his former best friend. On March 19, 2015, the jury announced their decision. They ruled Jonathan Brill guilty of first-degree murder of Jamie Hahn and the attempted murder of Nation Hahn. The judge issued a life sentence without parole. Jameen's intentions were utterly pure, and her death was so senseless that even Jonathan later acknowledged in an interview that if he had been honest with the Hahns, she would have forgiven him. Suddenly, their closest friend became their worst fear. This story defies any rational explanation. Today's story takes us to Raleigh, the capital city of North Carolina. Located in the northeast central region of North Carolina, Raleigh is one of the fastest growing cities in the U.S. Surrounded by beautiful oak trees, Raleigh is the perfect blend of history and traditions. However, in 2017, a dreadful crime would shake this city to its core. At around 1 a.m. on September 1, 2017, a 911 dispatcher from Raleigh Police Department received a call from 28-year-old Matthew Phelps, who sounded a bit sedated. During the call, he claimed that he had accidentally stabbed his wife Lauren to death while he was dreaming. He then suddenly woke up and saw his wife lying in a pool of blood on the floor. "I took more medicine than I should have." "What medicine did you take?" I took horse needle, cough, a cold, and courage. I know it can make you kill, but a lot of times I can't sleep at night. Is she breathing out? Is there a chance of moving? Of anything going on with her? Well, okay, we're gonna let me out of dry about 8. Did you drive? Because I bought wet on me because it was dry. Not long after this portion of the phone call, Matthew admits to why he's acting so strangely and presents a reason for the slaying. Raleigh police arrived at Matthew's Patuxent Drive home in Raleigh just seconds after the 7-minute call. Matthew's wife, 29-year-old Lauren, was lying motionless on the floor. A blood-soaked knife was on the bed, and the cough medicine was laid out on the bathroom counter, supporting his claim for taking cough medicine. Though Lauren exhibited no signs of life, paramedics still took her to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. Detectives were confused about whether it was a tragic accident or a planned murder, but they brought Matthew in for further questioning. The results of the autopsy performed on Lauren's corpse revealed gruesome details. Her body suffered 123 stab wounds. 44 of those were around her face, and the rest were on her head, neck, and arms. Although there was no doubt about who was responsible for Lauren's death, detectives were torn between the theory of her demise being a tragic accident or a planned murder. Hundreds of pictures on their social media accounts represented the couple's contented life together. Matthew did not have any criminal record. From the outside, they were a happy-go-lucky couple who had it all. The cough syrup theory could not be immediately discounted. After all, cough syrups, when taken in a high dosage, can cause euphoria, delusions, and dissociative phenomena which often result in people acting strangely. In order to solve the mystery of this killing, investigators began to dive deep into the couple's history. Lauren Ashley Nicole Hugomeyer was born on June 9, 1988, in Los Angeles County. In a tight-knit and religious family, Lauren had a picture-perfect childhood along with her 2 siblings, older sister Beth and younger sister Brianna. Lauren was known as an all-around happy person. She was known to be hardworking and studious. In 2007, Lauren graduated from Swain County High School in North Carolina. Afterwards, she graduated college with a degree in business administration and management in 2011 from Appalachian State University. After completing her studies, she worked as an auditor at Quintiles. She also started her own business selling Sensi products.
I pre-order late I will leave starting today. But today until the 31st, I have a special offer for 5 people if you want in on one of these.
She was very passionate about Sensi, and her Facebook page was filled with photos and videos about her side business, including trips she took with others who sell the Sensi products. Aside from that, Lauren was also an active member of Hope Lutheran Church and worked as a Sunday school teacher as part of her work with the church's children's and youth ministries. In her mid-20s, Lauren reconnected with one of her old classmates from middle school, Matthew Phelps. The two lost touch in high school since Matthew transferred and Lauren's family eventually moved to Raleigh, North Carolina. While Lauren grew up in a loving home, Matthew had not been so fortunate. Matthew did not have any close bonds with his family. He was primarily raised by his grandparents because his parents neglected their responsibilities. His parents separated after his birth. While his biological father was entirely absent from his life, His mother was also rarely around. His mother remarried a few times, but Matthew never formed a father and son type bond with any of his stepfathers. His grandparents tried their best to provide him with love and care, but there was not enough to fill the vacant place in his heart. This dynamic may have been what caused him to start acting out from an early age. Whether his living conditions affected his mind or not, Matthew started hanging out with the wrong crowd and began abusing drugs and alcohol in his high school years. Matthew and his friends were known to have often consumed quercetin, the same medicine that he was now claiming to have taken before attacking his wife. High amounts of quercetin cause a high, which Matthew and his friends took advantage of. This addiction began to spiral out of control, and as a result, Matthew's grandparents were eventually forced to take Matthew out of public high school and put him in a private Christian academy to try to get his life back on the right track. This worked well for Matthew. He started getting better grades in school and eventually graduated. He then attended the Clear Creek Baptist Bible College in Plainville, Kentucky, and seemed to have significantly improved from his early high school years to eventually graduating college in 2011. It was Matthew who stumbled upon Lauren's photos and realized that they both knew each other. After hesitating for a bit, Matthew reached out to Lauren through Instagram. He liked every picture of Lauren that was ever posted. The two began catching up, and as such things often go, the texts soon transitioned to long, late-night phone calls. Before long, both Matthew and Lauren fell head over heels for each other. The two began a long-distance relationship since Matthew was still living in Kentucky at the time. Despite living hundreds of miles away from each other, the relationship between them began to progress very quickly. It did not take long before Matthew made the effort to visit Lauren in Raleigh. Eventually, he moved back to North Carolina to be with her. Being so close to her family, Lauren was excited to introduce Matthew to everyone. Most of her family welcomed Matthew with open arms, trusting Lauren's choices. They saw him as a kind and well-behaved man who genuinely cared for their daughter. Lauren's mother, Lori, thought him to be the perfect fit for her daughter. However, Lauren's father, Dale, was skeptical about the relationship. Perhaps it was just a father's protectiveness for his daughter, or maybe a gut feeling. But as far as Dale was concerned, Matthew was moving way too fast and possibly hiding secrets from Lauren. Yet he could not put his finger on what exactly it was about Matthew that gave him that uneasiness. He decided to set his feelings aside because his daughter seemed so happy. In time, Matthew became part of the family. Dale's suspicions were finally taking shape when Matthew dropped a bombshell at the dinner table during a visit to Lauren's parents' house for a game night. He confessed to having a failed marriage prior to dating Lauren, but refused to share any other details. This raised questions about his integrity and intention, as not only had he already been divorced at such a young age, but also he hid the fact for months into his new relationship. And more than words, it was his body language that looked sketchy to Lauren's family. Nevertheless, Lauren loved him with all her heart and didn't seem to mind any of his actions, so the family offered their support when they progressed to the next step in their relationship. The couple finally got engaged in 2015. The engagement party was remembered as one of a kind by her family and friends. Matthew's mother, whom the family described as problematic, did not really like Lauren. She even went to the point of purposefully wearing a white dress to the wedding to make her feelings known. However, the event went off without a hitch, and the couple tied the knot the following year. The pair incorporated the Star Wars theme in their wedding since they were both huge fans of the franchise. Both Lauren and Matthew seemed to be on top of the world as they started their new journey together. For Lauren, married life was a dream come true. She had her own house, a job that she put all of her efforts into, and a husband who always knew how to make her smile. However, the dream marriage soon began to transform into an ugly reality as Matthew began to show his true colors just a few months into their marriage. Matthew was having a hard time finding jobs, and when he did find a job, he'd soon leave the job with little to no explanation. In addition to that, he idly spent most of his time playing video games while Lauren had to work multiple jobs to run the household. According to Lauren's family, whom she often confided in, this put a strain on their finances. But that wasn't the only factor putting financial strain on Lauren. Matthew was overspending on fancy electronic gadgets and gaming equipment, while Lauren was focusing on tightening their purse strings. He spent $1,200 on iTunes and Xbox subscriptions for his video gaming. He even go to the extent of stealing money out of Lauren's purse if she ever refused to pay for his frivolous lifestyle. Lauren had approximately $10,000 in her bank account before getting married to Matthew, but by the time of her death, it had dwindled to only $1,000. There were other problems in the relationship besides just Matthew's spending habits. While visiting Matthew's family home with them 6 months after the couple got married, not only did his mother give Lauren the cold shoulder, but she and Matthew fought the whole time. She felt like an outcast in their home. Naturally, the reasons behind most of the fights were in regard to Matthew's money-spending habits, which prevented them from pursuing things they wanted to do together. As mentioned earlier, the couple was a big fan of Star Wars, and they were trying to save money for a trip to Disney World. However, Matthew would spend whatever little was saved on his own selfish habits, never allowing the couple to get ahead. Additionally, Lauren was suspicious that Matthew had had an extramarital affair with their neighbor, whom Matthew regularly spent time with. There was an instance when Lauren was on the phone with her elder sister, Beth, while cooking dinner for Matthew. After coming back from work, he went out to hang out with a neighbor and left a text for Lauren stating that he was having way too much fun with a neighbor and that Lauren should have dinner without him. Although Matthew spent a lot of time with their neighbor, he was extremely possessive of Lauren. There were multiple fights regarding a man at their church who, Matthew thought, was hitting on Lauren. Matthew distrusted Lauren, which caused even more distance between them. Matthew justified his insecurities by recounting the story of how his ex-wife left him after meeting another man on a missionary trip. For obvious reasons, his justifications would not solve anything, as their relationship was on a downward spiral. Lauren had opened up to loved ones on multiple occasions about her desire to leave her controlling husband less than a year into their marriage. However, because of her religious beliefs, she was adamant about making the marriage work and tried to push divorce to the back of her mind as a last resort. Despite all of their issues, Lauren still tried to present a perfect marriage to the outside world. On every platform of social media, she continued to post pictures and videos of themselves accompanied by sugary sweet captions expressing their love. Yet that was in stark contrast to what was actually happening behind closed doors. Eventually, Matthew decided to go back to college to become a pastor for their church in an attempt to keep their marriage afloat. However, Lauren was not significantly impressed with this effort. In fact, fed up with his inconsiderate and immature behavior, Lauren was finally on the verge of leaving Matthew, but she would never have the chance to follow through with that decision. Instead, she was brutally murdered by her husband in their marital bed. With all this history, it did not take long to put the puzzle pieces together. They all concurred that everything about the crime scene looked way too staged. Not only were the knife and the cough syrup perfectly set out in certain positions, but Matthew had almost no blood on him, aside from some on his shoes and a few drops on his shirt. This was not consistent with someone who had stabbed a person 123 times. It looked as though Matthew had attempted to clean himself up, which contradicts his claims of being in a delusional state. Luminol tests performed around their apartment showed that there were traces of blood everywhere, which had been cleaned up before authorities could see it. Investigators now recalled how Matthew had shown no emotions when they arrived at the crime scene. Subsequently, Bayer, the maker of quercetin, released a statement saying that there was no evidence to suggest that quercetin is associated with violent behavior. Additionally, a medical report suggested that, at the time of the murder, his body contained a very low amount of the drug, and it was unlikely to have impacted his reasoning at all. However, Matthew opted to stick to his alibi about the cough syrup and did not change his story. So, investigators started digging deeper for more evidence. Upon delving further into Matthew's motives, the investigators found a journal where he wrote about all the troubles he was having with Lauren. He went on and on about his low esteem and insecurities in his relationship with Lauren. Despite Lauren's best efforts, Matthew never felt he fit in well with her family. The neighbor with whom Lauren had suspected Matthew of having an affair with told police that they were just friends and bonded over their struggles with anxiety and depression. She also shared that as they continued spending time together, Matthew began talking about more morbid subjects such as suicide and death. Perhaps he intended to get his hands on the licensed and concealed gun he knew she had in her home. Additionally, after gaining access to his phone, investigators discovered his concerning search history. He had searched for odd things, such as, "How loopy does quercetin make you?" Or, "Have other people been high from quercetin?" Looking solely at these Google searches, one could surmise that this murder was premeditated and he was already planning on using the cough medicine as a defense. However, this circumstantial evidence was not enough to build a solid case against him. Yet soon another discovery came to light. Matthew had a secret Instagram account, @Marty_radical, where he posted dark images from the movie American Psycho and pictures of him dressed as Patrick Bateman, the lead character of the movie. Apparently, Matthew was obsessed with serial killers and expressed to a friend that he was curious about what it would feel like to kill someone. Right before he murdered Lauren, he posted an Instagram photo with a caption saying, "Everyone thinks I'm a serial killer. #found an angel to kill." The account contained numerous posts that discussed the devil and demons. Finally, it was time to bring the matter to trial. Prosecutors were confident that they had enough evidence to implicate Matthew in his wife's intentional murder. However, Matthew's defense argued in court that this wasn't in Matthew's character and that he was in an unstable and depressed mental state when the murder occurred. With everybody, so that we can all together get to the bottom of this really significant project. To support the claim, they presented a few letters from Matt's co-workers to the judge, insisting that this was not in Matthew's character. The prosecution brought Matthew's ex-wife to the stand. Contradicting Matthew's previous claims of her cheating on him, she revealed that it was Matthew who cheated on her multiple times throughout their marriage. Like Lauren, she seemed to have similar issues in her marriage to Matthew. These included Matthew not working, spending way too much money, and not contributing anything to their dreams together, which ended up causing the separation. Matthew ultimately accepted a plea deal and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder to avoid the death penalty he was initially facing. But you're pleading guilty to one offense. That's the offense of first-degree murder. It is a felony. It carries the maximum penalty of death or life without the possibility of parole. Do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Do you personally plead guilty to the charge I just described?
Yes, sir.
And did you in fact murder your wife, Lauren Hugelmeyer Phelps, by stabbing her multiple times?
Yes, sir.
The matter finally came to a conclusion on October 5th, 2018, when Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. After sentencing, Matthew wrote an apology to Lauren's family.
"I'm sorry that I took away Lauren's life. A life that was deeply connected to so little people."
However, his apology fell on deaf ears, as her family said that it meant nothing to them.
Never. I'll take him to my grave. Though I hate him. No way. Old man can do that to any human being.
They stated that they could never forgive him for his thoughtless actions. They shared in a statement, "He was luring all of us into a trap by taking advantage of our kindness and generosity. We never once thought Lauren was in danger." To this day, Lauren's family feels a sense of blame for not intervening when they knew the relationship had taken a turn for the worse. To help others like their beloved Lauren, they've put together an organization called Lauren's Light, which raises awareness for abusive relationships and domestic violence. Do you think Matthew meticulously planned his wife's murder?